She has already died 4 times, and every single life ended in tragedy. Betrayed, murdered, sacrificed, and abandoned, but this time, she refuses to die again. Just when she thinks she has no one left to save her, she remembers the one being who once stood by her side, which is something completely unexpected. The story begins with Musee standing alone in a grand ballroom while couples dance around her. She realizes this is the 5th time she has witnessed the same scene. Across the room, her fiancé, Alfred, dances with another woman. The annual dance party at St. Belferia Academy is in full swing, with students dressed in formal tuxedos and gowns. But Musee can only focus on Alfred, who has chosen to attend with someone else. Alfred, the heir to the dukedom, gazes down with a gentle smile. Aliciella looks up at him with a bright, delighted expression. She is the woman Alfred is escorting instead of his own fiancé. Musee recalls the countless lives she has already lived and everything she experienced in each one. Her father, the head of the Schnorr family, is an earl. Musee was engaged to Alfred as part of a political alliance between their families, but Musee truly loved him. She studied relentlessly, worked hard to earn his affection, and even drove away other women to protect her place as his fiancée. Yet all that effort meant nothing. The moment Aliciella appeared, she took everything our girl had fought so hard to keep. At this point, you already know this won't end well, so subscribe and let's find out what happens. Musee is left alone while Alfred and Aliciella stand together on the other side of the ballroom. Musee's heart races as she struggles to understand what is happening. She stumbles into a man carrying a drink, and the glass slips from his hand and shatters on the floor. The broken glass reflects fragments of Musee's past. One shard shows Alfred happily standing beside Aliciella, while the others reveal the painful moments she has endured in her previous lives. Her eyes widen as the truth hits her. She has already lived through this exact moment 4 times. This is her 5th life. Once again, Alfred brings Aliciella to the dance party as his partner, completely disregarding his actual fiancé. Blood drips as the memory shifts toward the disaster awaiting her 4 months later. Musee knows exactly what awaits her. 4 months from now, she will be killed. Terror takes over as she covers her face, tears streaming from her eyes. In her first life, Alfred and the Prime Minister's son exiled Musee from the country. While wandering afterward, she was attacked by an unknown assailant and killed. Her second life ended when a knight who idolized Aliciella murdered her. In her third life, Musee was kidnapped and brutally mistreated before falling ill and eventually dying. In her fourth life, Musee was chosen as a sacrifice for the Church of the Evil Dragon. She thought Alfred had finally come to save her, only for him to kill her himself. No matter how her life changed, the ending was always the same: death. The man checks if Musee is alright after the glass shatters, but she barely responds. For the first time, she realizes that she had never remembered her previous lives until now. Musee covers her face in shock. With all her past memories back, she may finally have a chance to change her fate. But that hope quickly fades. Changing her future will not be nearly as easy as she thought. The people who killed her in her previous lives were all influenced by Aliciella. Now Musee has no idea who might turn against her next. Tears stream down her face as fear takes over. After dying 4 times, Musee knows exactly how terrifying her fate can be. She once loved Alfred despite knowing that his heart belonged to Aliciella. But when Musee looks at him now, she feels nothing. With her memories restored, whatever love she had for Alfred is gone. Musee walks up to him and calls his name. Alfred turns around with an irritated glare and asks what she wants, while Aliciella watches from behind him. Musee can see the contempt in Alfred's expression. His cold attitude toward her is nothing new. She stands her ground and asks Alfred to call off their engagement. Musee points out the obvious. Alfred clearly prefers Aliciella anyway. She knows he has never cared for her, so she refuses to waste her life trying to become a wife he does not want. Musee makes her position clear. She will not force a marriage where she is unwanted. The guests stare in shock as the confrontation unfolds. Alfred is caught off guard by her sudden demand. But ending the engagement is not that simple. Their marriage was arranged by both families, regardless of how either of them feels about it. As the Duke's heir, Alfred knows he cannot simply break the agreement. Alfred keeps his eyes on Aliciella, making Musee feel completely invisible. She can barely stand the situation anymore and just wants to escape. Then Musee gives him a sharp smile and offers another option. If he refuses to end the engagement, she can remain his wife in name only, while everyone spends their lives gossiping about Aliciella as his real wife. Aliciella's eyes widen with tears as she immediately objects, insisting she would never do something like that. Alfred steps in front of Aliciella and angrily demands how Musee could say something so cruel. Musee scoffs at the accusation. To her, the truth is hardly cruel. She fires back, asking why Alfred refuses to take his fiancé's hand if her words are really so cruel. At this point, she feels like she is the only sane person in the room. Musee starts wondering if Alfred is truly that blind, or if she is the one losing her mind. She tells Alfred to find a way to end their engagement. After all, death has already taken everything from her 4 times. The ballroom falls silent. Everyone stares in shock while Alfred struggles to process what Musee has just said. Alfred reminds her that, as the daughter of an earl, she should already understand how these political arrangements work. Musee lowers her gaze and quietly admits that she understands, but understanding does not make the pain disappear. She feels exhausted, miserable, and desperate for someone to save her. Then she remembers her 4th life, when she once sat peacefully beside a massive dragon and gently stroked its head. A sharp, reptilian eye opens, glowing gold against the dragon's dark scales. Tears stream down Musee's face as she silently calls out to Ragna, begging him to save her. Deep within a dark void, a small dragon lies curled up in a faint glow. Then, his eye suddenly opens. The dragon slowly unfolds his massive wings as glowing specks drift through the darkness around him. The scene shifts to the Schnorr estate. 2 days have passed since the dance. Musee lies confined to her room, with nothing but her thoughts to keep her company. Her confinement was hardly surprising after she publicly demanded the end of her engagement. Even so, she never expected her own family to lock her away. Neither the Schnorrs nor the Duke's family plan to interfere with Alfred and Aliciella. Musee knows what comes next. They will grow closer, have a child, and live happily while she eventually gets killed again. Our girl sits up, determined to break this cycle. She refuses to die again and starts searching for a way to escape her fate. Then she remembers her 4th life with the dragon. For some reason, that memory brings her a sense of comfort. Musee has not met Ragna in this life, yet she still wishes he would come save her. In her 4th life, he became the only person she could truly rely on before her death. She remembers Ragna telling her not to die. If she could see him again, maybe she would not feel so afraid. Tears stream down her face as she clutches her collar and quietly calls Ragna's name. She is terrified. A sudden knock at the door startles her. Musee turns toward it and nervously asks who is there. A voice from outside informs her that Alfred has come to see her. Musee's eyes widen as panic immediately sets in. She tries to refuse, claiming that she is not feeling well, but 3 maids suddenly enter the room and make it clear that her refusal will not be accepted. Our girl stares at them in shock as they explain that the head of the household ordered her to receive Alfred. She realizes she has no choice but to face him. Downstairs, Alfred waits on a sofa with an officer standing behind him. Musee enters the room, clutching her shawl as Alfred calmly sits on the sofa with a drink in hand. Her attention immediately shifts to the officer behind him. His short, light hair and sharp eyes look strangely familiar. Then it hits her. This is the same man who raised his sword and killed her in her 2nd life. Alfred remarks that she took long enough to come down. Musee quietly apologizes for the delay. She grips the edge of the sofa, trying to hide her fear as sweat forms on her face. Unable to ignore the danger, Musee nervously asks who the man behind Alfred is. Alfred introduces him as Jean Bista, his friend and personal guard. He is a prospective knight from the Academy's Knight Department, hired because of his exceptional skills. Jean gives Musee a polite greeting with an unsettling smile. Musee nervously introduces herself in return, but the moment she sees his expression, a chill runs through her. Jean's smile never reaches his eyes. Musee asks why he has come to see her. Alfred gives her a stern look and says he wants to discuss her behavior. Musee looks at him nervously, wondering what she did wrong. Alfred slams his hand against the sofa and accuses her of making Aliciella cry. He angrily brings up Musee's remarks at the dance, especially her claim that everyone would see Aliciella as his true wife. He demands to know if she understands how much those words hurt her. Musee can barely believe what she is hearing. Aliciella is being treated like the victim, even though Musee is the one who has suffered for years. She snaps that she genuinely does not understand. Alfred immediately accuses her of pretending not to. Jean's expression turns cold. He suddenly draws his sword and glares at Musee. The blade slams into the sofa right beside her, leaving our girl frozen in terror. Musee screams and cowers as Jean stands over her with his sword drawn. A maid calls out to Musee in concern as she trembles uncontrollably on the sofa. Alfred calls Jean's name in shock and insists he only meant to reprimand Musee for showing no remorse. Jean coldly defends himself. Since he never actually killed her, he insists he did nothing wrong. Musee's heart pounds as she remembers her 2nd life, when Jean cut her to pieces. She wonders if this is how she will die again. Fear overwhelms her. She has no idea what to do anymore and can only pray for someone to save her. Tears roll down her face as she clutches her chest and whispers Ragna's name, begging him to save her. Suddenly, a powerful gust tears through the Schnorr estate. The sky darkens, and the entire house begins to shake. Alfred stares outside in shock, wondering why the sky suddenly turned pitch black. Jean offers to inspect the grounds while Musee turns toward the window. A familiar presence washes over Musee. A tear forms in her eye as the silhouette of a flying dragon appears in the darkness. Musee stumbles backward in disbelief. A massive dragon has appeared right outside the window. Tears fill our girl's eyes as she recognizes Ragna. The massive dragon leans close to the window while she whispers his name in disbelief. Musee reaches toward him with tears of joy and relief. After everything she has endured, she has finally found her only true ally again. A massive shadow sweeps over the royal capital of Noviesta, plunging the entire kingdom into darkness. The townsfolk panic as the sky suddenly turns pitch black. King Freddy von Noviesta watches in terror as the shadow engulfs his kingdom. Through the window, the king and his men see a gigantic creature with a body black as night, looming over the entire capital. Ancient legends tell of a terrifying monster that feeds on human despair and whose true form will bring about the end of the world. Trembling in horror, King Freddy identifies the creature as the evil dragon of ruin. It is the legendary beast destined to destroy the world. Tears fill Musee's eyes as she reaches toward the giant dragon and softly calls Ragna's name. Inside the room, Musee faces the window while Jean and Alfred watch. Suddenly, Jean hears a sharp sound. Jean draws his sword and demands to know if Musee caused the sudden commotion. Alfred calls out to Jean in surprise as Musee stands nearby with a dark expression. A thunderous roar fills the room as the massive dragon crashes through the window. Jean groans and grabs his head while Alfred and the maids shield themselves from the flying glass. The dragon lands outside the shattered window and realizes Musee has been here all along. Musee gazes at its jet-black scales and golden eyes as the dragon moves closer. A tearful smile spreads across her face. She recognizes the so-called evil dragon from her fourth life and feels relieved to see Ragna again. Ragna looks down at her and demands to know who she is. Musee realizes he does not remember her in this lifetime. She politely apologizes for the sudden introduction and tells him her name. Ragna makes it clear that he does not know Musee and insists that this is their first meeting. Musee clutches her collar and quietly agrees with Ragna. Ragna admits that his heart cries out to her even though he does not know her. He explains that Musee's voice woke him, telling him that she was important to him. Our girl smiles softly, feeling that hearing those words from Ragna is all she needs. Tears roll down her cheek as she feels saved simply by meeting him and knowing she was on someone's mind. With a bright smile, Musee urges Ragna to flee before the Church of the Evil Dragon finds him. She explains that the group worships Ragna and plans to use his power to destroy the world. Ragna eyes her suspiciously and asks what she knows about the church. Musee admits she knows only a little, but warns that the church will capture Ragna within a year. Ragna glares at her and asks if she is a member of the church. Our girl denies being part of the church, but warns that Ragna's appearance will soon force both the church and the kingdom to act. Alfred stares in disbelief as he and Jean struggle to understand what is happening. Ragna quietly gazes down at Musee as she gives him a gentle smile. Musee realizes that speaking with Ragna has sealed her fate and that she will likely be executed. Since the evil dragon of ruin is destined to destroy the world, anyone who can communicate with it will be branded a conspirator and eliminated. Ragna realizes Musee has no intention of revealing anything else. Musee calmly tells him that she has nothing more to say. Ragna's eyes glow as he decides to search through her memories instead. Musee reaches out in panic and protests. A surge of power engulfs her as two enormous glowing eyes appear in the darkness. Fragments of Musee's past lives drift through the darkness, revealing her memories to Ragna. Ragna lets out a quiet huff as he watches Musee through the shattered window. He asks her to choose between him and the two men who killed her. Musee stares in shock, caught off guard by the question. Tears fill her eyes as she smiles warmly and says the choice is obvious. She would choose Ragna. Ragna gives her a gentle look and praises her answer. Jean steps forward and grips his weapon tightly while Alfred watches him. Jean raises his sword behind Musee, ready to strike as she faces the broken window. Ragna glares at him and commands the human not to move. A crushing force fills the room, leaving Alfred, Jean, and the maids frozen in fear. Jean breaks into a cold sweat as he realizes he cannot move a muscle. Our girl flexes her hand and realizes she is the only one who can still move. She marvels at the evil dragon's overwhelming power. Ragna looks down at Musee and offers to protect her. Musee stares up at him in surprise and softly calls his name. She watches as Ragna extends one massive claw toward the open window. A glowing magic circle forms around his sharp claws. A powerful gust sweeps through the window as Ragna unleashes his magic. Musee watches in amazement as the entire window crumbles into fine sand. Ragna scoops her into his arms and leaps into the sky, leaving Musee stunned. Musee asks if he has gotten smaller, and Ragna grins as he explains that he simply matched her size. Ragna tells Musee to stay quiet, warning that she could bite her tongue if she talks while flying. He spreads his massive wings and flies away from the estate with our girl in his arms. As they soar above the clouds, Musee looks down at the capital, stretching out below. She takes in the breathtaking view while safely cradled in Ragna's arms. Ragna explains that they met this time because she called out to him. With a grin, he tells her that their meeting marks a brand new beginning. Musee gasps as his words sink in. She remembers how meeting Ragna in her fourth life was a death sentence for her, but this time she met him before anything was set in stone, giving them a chance to change the future. A tear rolls down Musee's cheek as she leans closer and hugs Ragna tightly. As they fly across the open sky, our girl reflects that she still does not know when she will die, but this new beginning fills her with hope. She smiles softly, hoping to spend her fifth life with the evil dragon for as long as possible. Musee looks up at Ragna and asks where they are headed. She gasps when a grand structure comes into view and realizes it is the royal castle. Ragna heads straight for the castle towers, declaring that he has business with the king. The guards panic and scatter as the massive dragon approaches the castle. With a fierce grin, Ragna glares at the castle and calls for the king to come out. Ragna glares with his single sharp eye and declares that he has business with this country's king, ordering him to come forward. His massive shadow engulfs the royal castle grounds, throwing the guards into panic as they desperately call for reinforcements. A figure then steps onto the courtyard. King Freddy steps onto the castle grounds with a spear in hand and silently looks up at Ragna. Musee starts to call Ragna's name, but he quickly stops her and warns her not to say it. She quietly nods. Freddy stares in shock before nervously declaring that he is the king. Musee gasps when she realizes that the man before them is King Freddy. She knows Freddy as the wise ruler who single-handedly ended the country's civil war, earning a reputation as a skilled military and political leader. Ragna crashes into the courtyard before Freddy, still keeping Musee safely in his claws. Calling himself the evil dragon of ruin, Ragna says he has come to negotiate with Freddy. Freddy stammers in confusion at the mention of negotiations, unsure what Ragna wants. He nervously asks if the negotiations concern the young woman in Ragna's arms. Ragna huffs, impressed by Freddy's sharp instincts, and confirms that Musee is the reason he came. With a grin, Ragna reveals that he wants Musee as his mate and asks for the king's permission to live with her in the kingdom. Musee freezes in shock at the word mate, her face turning bright red. Freddy is equally stunned as the guards panic over the dragon settling in their kingdom. Ragna explains that his current home is impossible for humans to live in, so he has decided to adapt to Musee's way of life instead. Freddy nervously points out that Ragna does not actually need to live in this country. Ragna firmly replies that he still has business to take care of here. He mentions several people he needs to deal with, including Alfred from the Duke's family and Jean, who is standing nearby. A dark grin spreads across Ragna's face as he declares that he's going to kill them. Our girl gasps in shock, unable to understand why Ragna suddenly wants to kill them. Freddy is equally stunned by the dragon's declaration. Ragna says that once he is done, he will leave and never return to the country. Musee hesitates before questioning him. She looks up at Ragna and asks why he wants to kill Alfred. Ragna reminds her that Jean raised his sword against her, asking if that alone isn't enough reason, as he gently tightens his hold on her. He adds that Jean hurt the woman who has captured his heart. Ragna admits that healing magic isn't his strength and warns that trying to heal Musee could overwhelm her with too much power and kill her. His glowing eye narrows as he admits that seeing Musee hurt makes him want to destroy the entire country. Musee panics and tells him he cannot do that, but Ragna simply laughs. Ragna flashes a sharp grin and decides that if Musee won't allow him to destroy the country, he'll settle for killing a few specific people instead. Ragna considers the situation and casually notes that the royal capital might get demolished in the process. Below, Freddy and his guards remain frozen in fear. Freddy breaks into a nervous sweat, wondering if the dragon really just threatened to destroy the royal capital. He realizes that Alfred is the Duke's legitimate son and, more importantly, his own nephew. Freddy also knows exactly who Musee is. He grips his weapon tightly, realizing that letting a dragon kill his nephew over an attack on Musee would become a massive scandal. Ragna looks down at Freddy and offers a deal. If they are allowed to stay in the country, he is willing to compromise. His glowing eye narrows as he clarifies that his idea of compromise is simply postponing the capital's destruction. Freddy nervously asks if he means it's only a postponement, and Ragna confirms it without hesitation. Ragna points out that there's no telling when someone who raised a sword against a frail woman might try it again. Musee quietly listens. Freddy looks back in surprise when a voice from the castle archway calls out, asking His Majesty to wait. Two riders then approach on horseback. Alfred rides in alongside Jean and calls out to King Freddy, insisting that he did nothing wrong and demanding that the king defend him. Our girl recoils as Alfred glares directly at her. Alfred points at her angrily, claiming they saw everything, and blaming her for what happened. He accuses Musee of summoning the evil dragon, insisting that they only lowered their swords because of her actions. Musee stammers in shock, struggling to respond as Ragna quietly looks down at her. Ragna unleashes a deafening roar and orders them to stop their nonsense. The sheer pressure makes everyone below tremble in fear. He furiously declares that he came because they raised their swords against his beloved, making their own actions the reason he is here. Alfred gasps at the revelation, while Jean steps forward and angrily tells the evil dragon to shut up. Jean defends himself, insisting that all he did was point his sword at Musee. Ragna's eye twitches with irritation. Ragna spreads his massive wings as a dark aura erupts around him, keeping Musee safely secured in his arms. Freddy and the guards recoil in terror as Ragna's glowing eyes pierce through the darkness. He repeats Jean's excuse that all he did was point his sword at Musee. Jean angrily argues that Musee hurt Aliciella and made her cry, insisting that his reaction was justified. Ragna scoffs at Jean's excuse and lets out a dismissive laugh. He points out that Alfred brought another woman to a party despite being engaged to our girl. She simply asked to end their engagement after seeing it, so Ragna questions how that could possibly hurt Aliciella. Ragna bares his sharp teeth and coldly asks if they have all lost their minds. Alfred is stunned by the blunt accusation, while Freddy and the guards silently process what they just heard. Freddy begins to realize that Ragna might actually have a point. He admits to himself that the dragon's argument makes sense and that Alfred and Jean are the ones behaving irrationally. Alfred angrily rejects the accusation, insisting that Ragna is wrong and that Musee is the one who has lost her mind. He desperately begs Freddy not to believe a word Ragna or Musee says. Alfred desperately warns Freddy that the evil dragon will brainwash him if he listens to them. Musee shudders and clutches her chest as Ragna scoffs, calling Alfred an eyesore. His patience runs out. Ragna glares at Alfred and tells him to go ahead and die right there. Dark tendrils burst forth, binding Alfred and Jean before slamming them into the ground. Freddy urgently begs Ragna to stop, but he only huffs in response. Musee desperately tells Ragna to stop as well, making him pause and turn toward her. The dark tendrils vanish, releasing Alfred and Jean. Ragna turns his massive head toward Musee and softly calls her name, seemingly wondering why she stopped him. Musee reaches toward him and gently explains that he doesn't need to get his hands dirty for them because they aren't worth the effort. She smiles warmly through her tears and assures him that she's fine. Knowing he wanted to protect her is already more than enough. Ragna grumbles that Musee is far too kind, then wonders if he was being a little too forceful. He leans closer and asks if she stopped him because she still loves Alfred. Musee giggles, leaving Ragna to call her name in confusion. She blushes and smiles, saying his worried expression made him look like a cute little puppy. Ragna's reptilian eye widens in surprise at being called cute. He looks away and mutters that if making her laugh is enough, then he doesn't mind. Musee relaxes comfortably in his arms. Ragna turns back to Freddy and says they should get back to business. The king nervously agrees. He raises a massive claw and offers another deal. If they are allowed to stay, he will also protect the kingdom whenever necessary. Freddy and the guards gasp in surprise. Ragna explains that officially protecting the kingdom would anger other countries, so his help will simply come whenever he happens to be around. He makes it clear that everything he's doing is for Musee, warning that anyone who harms her will face the consequences. Ragna flashes a chilling grin and warns that if anything happens to Musee, he will destroy the entire country, or perhaps even the world. The guards freeze in terror at the horrifying ultimatum. Freddy breaks into a nervous sweat before agreeing to Ragna's demands. Ragna adds one more condition. Freddy must dissolve our girl and Alfred's engagement because Musee will be his bride. Freddy immediately agrees, declaring the engagement officially dissolved in the king's name. Ragna grins with satisfaction and praises Freddy for being a reasonable man. Alfred protests, asking Freddy if he is really going to obey the evil dragon. Freddy angrily orders him to be quiet, blaming him for creating this entire mess in the first place. Alfred glares back in frustration as Ragna watches silently with Musee in his arms. Ragna looks down at Musee and asks if he can kill Alfred after all, but she immediately refuses. Ragna chuckles and claims he was only joking. Musee smiles at him and points out that he certainly didn't sound like he was joking. Night falls over the estate, marking the end of Ragna's successful negotiations. Musee sleeps peacefully in bed, while Ragna sits beside her under the moonlight, quietly watching over her. He gently strokes her head with a claw and smiles, thinking that she hasn't changed at all. A voice breaks the silence, asking Musee if she really doesn't want revenge. Musee sits beside Ragna in the cave and wonders why she would seek revenge. He points out that she keeps getting killed for no reason, so wanting payback would be perfectly natural. Ragna looks down at her and offers to fulfill her desire if revenge is what she truly wants. Our girl gently smiles and assures him that he has misunderstood. She refuses to seek revenge because she won't lower her own worth over something like that. Ragna accepts her decision and promises to respect it. In that moment, he realizes he has fallen in love with her dignified gaze and unwavering heart. Ragna remembers Musee lying in a pool of blood and regrets not killing the person responsible back then, even if he had to do it by force. He recalls Musee crying and silently vows that if they ever meet again, he will keep his promise to her. As Musee sleeps peacefully, Ragna vows to love her as his wife. The power of the evil dragon now resides deep within Musee, carrying the divine protection she received in her fourth life. Ragna watches over her and swears that even if the entire world stands against him, he will never let Musee's life be taken again. He leans closer and gently touches her, softly confessing his love. Musee stirs awake and discovers a dark-haired man sleeping beside her under the covers. She bolts upright in shock and clutches the blanket around herself, demanding to know who he is. The shirtless man only grumbles sleepily. The man sits up and remarks that Musee is surprisingly energetic this early in the morning. She gasps as realization dawns on her. Musee calls out Ragna's name in disbelief as he calmly stretches and lets out a huge yawn on the bed. Ragna smiles warmly and wishes Musee good morning, telling her she looks as beautiful as ever. Aliciella clutches her face in distress, wondering why everything is going wrong. She fumes, realizing this should be her last chance, and wishing she could use her gift one more time to start over. Aliciella bitterly wonders how different things would be if that woman were not around. 1 week after the negotiations with the king, a gentle hand brushes through long blonde hair. Musee sits nervously before the mirror as Ragna, now in human form, happily brushes her hair. His presence has completely changed her daily life, and her heart races whenever he is near. Everyone avoids the room because no one wants to approach Ragna. Even the maids and Musee's family keep their distance, leaving our girl to handle her own needs. His hand brushes the back of Musee's neck, sending a sudden shiver through her. Embarrassed, Musee turns around and calls out Ragna's name. He playfully apologizes, sticking out his tongue as he jokes that his human form makes it much easier to touch her. Ragna leans closer with a teasing smirk and asks if he should help our girl change her clothes too. Musee turns bright red and insists she can handle it herself. Ragna closes his eyes with a faint smile, admitting that it is a shame. She thinks Ragna is far too touchy-feely, but at least she can dress herself. Unfortunately, the wide opening at the back of her dress makes that much harder than expected. Ragna opens his shirt and looks over when Musee calls his name. From behind the screen, Musee nervously asks if Ragna can fasten the buttons on the back of her dress. Ragna gives her a gentle, affectionate smile. He stands behind Musee and carefully fastens her dress, telling her how well it suits her. His compliment leaves her blushing. Ragna gently lifts a strand of her hair and smiles, telling Musee that she is beautiful. Musee blushes deeply, completely flustered by the way he holds her hair. Musee pouts and complains that Ragna is always complimenting her looks. He simply scratches his head and says it is because she really is beautiful, then suddenly gets an idea. Ragna leans closer and suggests they go out today. Musee turns toward him, surprised by the sudden invitation. With a warm smile, Ragna clarifies that he means they should go on a date. Musee lights up at the thought of her very first date, happily walking beside him through the bustling town. Our girl can barely contain her excitement as they stroll through the lively market. Ragna looks around and remarks that the city seems to be thriving. Musee cheerfully explains that King Freddy is responsible for the city's prosperity. Ragna admits that this is the first time he has seen the city thriving like this, recalling that the last time he woke up, he was fighting a god. Musee nearly freezes in shock when she hears that he once fought a god. Ragna stops at a market stall and curiously asks about the hats on display. Musee giggles at his innocent confusion. With a bright smile, Musee reaches out her hand and calls for him to come with her. Ragna looks at her outstretched hand in surprise before giving her a soft, warm smile. Musee excitedly points toward a fruit stand as she and Ragna walk hand in hand through the cobblestone street. She soon notices that Ragna is attracting plenty of attention from the women around them. A vendor offers Ragna a fresh apple, leaving both of them surprised. Another woman rushes over and offers him a slice of cake from her plate. Soon, a crowd of women surrounds Ragna, eagerly showering him with food and fruit, while Musee watches from a distance. Musee pouts, annoyed and jealous as she grumbles that this date is turning out to be no fun at all. Ragna remains trapped in the middle of the crowd as the excited women continue fawning over him. Musee resigns herself to waiting by a stone wall, figuring this will take a while. Then, a hand suddenly touches the wall beside her. Before she can react, someone grabs her from behind and clamps a hand over her mouth. Ragna notices what happened and turns sharply, his expression darkening with murderous hostility. Ragna reflects that this country is filled with fools. Musee sits tied to a wooden chair, her wrists and body bound tightly with ropes while a blindfold covers her eyes. A voice apologizes before removing the blindfold. Musee opens her eyes and stares in shock as her vision clears. Victor Wachtel, the Prime Minister's son, stands before her. She immediately recognizes the stern man with glasses. Musee remembers her third life, when Victor was Aliciella's closest friend. Victor asks if she knows why he brought her here. Musee quietly says no, prompting him to click his tongue before roughly yanking her hair. He angrily accuses Musee of driving the country insane by summoning the evil dragon, making her wince in pain. Victor rants that the residents have begun turning against the king because they fear the evil dragon's power. Musee calmly meets his glare and asks if he intends to kill her because of it. Victor twirls a strand of her hair with a sinister smirk, declaring that she will take responsibility for throwing the country into chaos. Musee responds with a quiet, unimpressed, She fixes Victor with a knowing look and points out that he is not doing this for the country. Musee reveals that he is actually doing all of this for Aliciella, leaving Victor stunned. Victor crosses his arms with a smirk and admits she is right, revealing that Aliciella ordered him to kill her. Musee lowers her gaze, wondering why Aliciella would want her dead. Musee looks up with disbelief and asks if he is really going to kill her just because Aliciella said so. With a sharp smile, she questions whether her life and death are really up to Aliciella, asking if she thinks she is some kind of god. Victor clicks his tongue as his expression turns cold, a bead of sweat running down his face. Enraged by the insult, Victor slaps Musee across the face and demands to know if she is trying to disrespect Aliciella. He fiercely declares that Aliciella is a saint, so if she says, Musee must die, then she must die. Musee's eyes widen as she realizes what he just said. She turns toward him and asks if he really called Aliciella a saint. Victor panics, sweating as he insists Musee tricked him into saying it. Musee smirks and calmly points out that she only exposed what he was hiding. She quietly processes the word saint, finally understanding why Alfred and the others held Aliciella in such high regard. Musee recalls that saints are young women blessed with mysterious powers, believed to be chosen by God to bring prosperity to the land. Since only one saint can exist at a time, Musee realizes Aliciella must be the country's hidden saint. With a red mark still on her cheek, Musee wonders if she is really expected to die just to protect the saint. Victor coldly confirms her suspicion and tells her to die quietly without resisting. Victor walks across the wooden floor, revealing that he will not kill her himself. Instead, he plans to sell her to bandits or even a trafficker. He smirks, adding that involving a few more people will not make any difference now. Musee shudders as a terrifying realization hits her. Victor has accomplices. Musee finally understands why she was attacked in the royal capital during her third life, despite the city being considered completely safe. She realizes Victor was behind everything that happened. Bound to the wooden chair, Musee suddenly lets out a soft laugh. Victor stares at her in confusion, asking what she finds so funny. Musee keeps smiling, remarking that this outcome might be far less painful than being slaughtered. With a chilling smile, Musee dares Victor to kill her. Her intense gaze makes him visibly shudder. A dark silhouette suddenly appears behind Musee as Ragna emerges from the shadows in his human form. He calmly tells Musee not to be so eager to die. Victor jolts in shock, breaking into a cold sweat at the unexpected voice. Musee turns toward him in surprise and asks when he arrived. Ragna answers with a gentle, reassuring smile. Ragna swiftly cuts through the ropes, freeing Musee from the chair. She looks up and asks how he knew where she was. Ragna leans closer with a soft smile and reminds her that he kissed her neck that morning. Ragna lifts a strand of Musee's hair, revealing a faint mark on the back of her neck. He explains that he marked her, allowing him to find her immediately. Ragna holds Musee close and explains that Victor talked for so long that he decided to wait while erasing his presence. He admits suppressing his bloodlust was difficult, but his words trail off when he notices Musee's face. Ragna suddenly notices the injury near her mouth. Musee casually looks away and says she was slapped. A terrifying aura erupts from Ragna as his eyes narrow with murderous rage. He grins and mutters that humans really are fools. Dark tendrils lash around Victor, binding him tightly before violently slamming him into the floor. Victor crashes down with a heavy thud as Ragna casually lowers his hand, leaving him unconscious. Musee grabs Ragna's arm and tells him to stop, since Victor is already unconscious, insisting that her injury is only a small cut. Ragna looks down hesitantly. Musee grabs his face with both hands and looks straight into his eyes, shouting that this is all his fault. Tears fill Musee's eyes as she blames him for what happened, saying he should have stayed by her side instead of getting surrounded by other women. Ragna droops like a scolded puppy, meekly apologizing for leaving Musee alone. Musee gently holds his arm and reminds him that he promised they were going on a date. She looks up at him sincerely and warns that he cannot let himself get distracted by other women. Her words hit Ragna right in the heart, leaving him blushing intensely as Victor lies unconscious nearby. Musee suggests they continue their date another time. Nearby, a mysterious hooded figure notices her. Ragna gently cups Musee's cheek and nervously asks if she is really all right, unaware that the hooded figure is watching them from behind a stone wall. The figure observes Musee Schnorr, noting that she appears to be an ordinary woman on the surface. A running child suddenly bumps into them. The stranger pulls back the hood, revealing a sharp-featured face, and casually remarks that completing the assigned job is all that matters. Ragna protests in frustration, insisting that he does not want Musee to leave. Musee calmly holds out a folded shirt, patiently dealing with his mood. She pats our boy's head, thinking that he is especially cranky today. School starts tomorrow. Street Belfaria Academy is a prestigious school with a long history, attended mostly by the children of nobles. The academy has 3 departments. The General Education Department is for royalty and nobility. The Knights Department trains students who want to become knights. The Service Department prepares students who seek employment under the nobility. Alfred, Aliciella, Jean, and Victor are all students at St. Belfaria Academy. Ragna frantically argues that Musee does not need to go to school. He worries that it will take away their time together and leave her vulnerable to those people who tried to kill her. Musee nervously explains that she does not want people to think she is running away from Alfred and the others. She also believes school will teach her how to behave like a refined lady. Musee grips the bedsheets tightly, wondering if she has finally gone mad. She admits to herself that dying is terrifying, yet she cannot help wondering if this path will end any better. With a gentle smile, Musee tells Ragna that whenever she makes him sad, she starts feeling like she would not mind dying again. Ragna's expression turns pained as he quietly asks her not to say things like that. Her countless deaths have left a deep contradiction inside her, torn between the desire to live and a quiet acceptance of death. As long as Ragna stays by her side, Musee feels she can keep smiling until the very end. She sees these conflicting feelings as proof that something inside her has broken. Ragna relaxes on the bed and asks why those people are after her, wondering if she knows anything about it. Our girl remembers how, in her first 4 lives, she constantly warned Aliciella to stay away from Alfred because he was her fiancé. Ragna admits that it made sense since they were engaged, but his tone suddenly changes as he calls out to Musee. He leans in close and angrily orders our girl never to say another man's name when he is around, making his jealousy crystal clear. Musee blinks in surprise as Ragna grumbles right beside her. A soft blush spreads across her face as she asks if he is jealous. Ragna turns away, his face burning with embarrassment as sweat trickles down his cheek. Our girl places a hand over her racing heart and points out that he really likes her. Ragna covers his mouth, then shyly admits that she is right. He gently cups her cheek and confesses that he is drawn to everything about her, from her appearance and personality to her very soul. Ragna assures our girl that even if she believes she is broken, he does not care. All that matters is having her by his side. He gently holds her cheek and asks her never to say that she would not mind dying again, while our girl answers with a warm smile. Ragna grins mischievously, saying he would rather hear her admit that she is so happy spending time with him that she could die. Ragna gets out of bed with a focused expression, leaving Musee to wonder what he is planning. He turns to Musee with a bright smile and cheerfully announces that he is going to pay the king a little visit. Ragna transforms into a dragon and takes off into the sky, leaving Musee gasping in disbelief as she calls after him. Musee sits on the edge of the bed, wondering what he meant by those words as a growing sense of dread takes hold. The new school term begins, and Musee heads for the waiting carriage in her neatly pressed uniform, bidding Ragna farewell before leaving for school. Ragna beams with delight as he points out the ribbon he bought on his way back from the castle. He says it looks perfect on Musee, especially since it matches his black hair. Musee sweat drops at his unusually cheerful mood, wondering what he could have done at the castle to put him in such high spirits. She points out that her ribbon matches her silver hair and tells him that it looks good on him too. Ragna gives her a warm smile from the estate gates and wishes her a good day as the carriage pulls away. Inside the moving carriage, Musee watches the scenery with concern, convinced Ragna is up to something and hoping she is just overthinking it. Students make their way toward the imposing main building of Street Belferia Academy as the new term begins. Musee steps onto the cobblestone path, ignoring the curious glances from students gathered near the gates. The students whisper among themselves, pointing out Lady Musee and discussing how the king ordered the cancellation of her engagement. One student coldly remarks that Musee was simply discarded. Musee expected this kind of reaction, but she realizes the rumors have already been twisted beyond recognition. The gossip gets worse as students claim Musee became unstable out of jealousy toward Aliciella, forcing Alfred to appeal directly to the king. She knows none of it is true. Others speculate that she was unfaithful or had already given herself to someone else. Musee silently walks past them, furious at how completely wrong they are. Musee suddenly stops when two familiar figures approach. Reed walks ahead while Carlos follows behind, leaving her frozen in surprise. The man before her is Reed von Noviesta, the crown prince and the king's eldest son. Reed greets Musee with a smooth good morning, catching her slightly off guard. Musee gives a polite curtsy and respectfully greets His Highness. She recalls meeting Reed several times while accompanying Alfred, finding it hard to believe that the crown prince actually remembers her. Reed comments on the commotion surrounding her lately, and Musee calmly acknowledges it. With a warm smile, Reed brings up the rumors claiming that Alfred simply discarded her. Musee calmly explains that the engagement was officially cancelled under the king's name, adding that she assumed His Highness already knew. Reed gives a sly chuckle, touching his chin as he questions whether that is really the case. A strange unease runs through Musee as Reed calls her name with a dark smirk. Reed suddenly asks if it is true that Musee summoned the evil dragon, leaving her horrified. The surrounding students erupt in disbelief, questioning whether Lady Musee really summoned the evil dragon as she stands frozen in shock. Musee clenches her fist as sweat trickles down her hand, realizing Reed deliberately exposed her in front of the entire crowd. Carlos frantically calls out to His Highness, clearly alarmed by what he just said. Carlos anxiously asks Reed if he is really trying to ruin Lady Musee's reputation based on nothing but rumors. Reed calmly asks why Carlos is so upset, explaining that since they are only rumors, he simply asked Musee to clear them up herself. Musee recognizes the man as His Highness's servant, Carlos Flit. Reed smirks, insisting that it is perfectly reasonable to ask whether she summoned the dragon directly from the person involved. Musee can only glare at him in silence. Musee faces forward with a firm expression and clearly denies summoning the evil dragon. She admits to herself that she did ask for his help, but that hardly means she summoned him. The whole argument feels ridiculously petty. Musee firmly points out that bringing this up in front of a crowd will make everyone doubt her and treat her like a traitor. Reed gives her a cold smile, warning that if she really did summon the evil dragon, she would indeed be branded a traitor. Musee glares back with fierce determination, arguing that if she had truly summoned the evil dragon, the entire country would have been reduced to ruins the moment he appeared. The tension between them grows as Musee and Reed lock eyes in a fierce standoff. Reed scoffs and turns away, saying they will be late for class before calling Carlos to follow. Carlos bows and respectfully agrees. A smug smile crosses Reed's face as he glances back and casually tells Musee to excuse him. Carlos gives Musee a polite bow before following Reed inside. She lets out a weary sigh, already wishing she could go home. The classroom fills with students as a teacher takes her place at the podium. The teacher welcomes everyone back from break and announces that a new student will be joining the class. She calls for the new student to come in, leaving Musee surprised since transfer students are so rare. Musee's eyes widened in complete shock. Ragna walks into the classroom wearing thick spiral glasses and a loose school uniform, cheerfully introducing himself as Ragna Dragnica. The teacher tells Ragna to choose any seat he likes, while Musee stares at him in disbelief, wondering what kind of ridiculous disguise he is wearing. Ragna strolls down the aisle and settles beside Musee, making her realize that his visit to the king must have been connected to this sudden transfer. He looks down at her through his swirly glasses and cheerfully greets her as though they have never met. Musee turns away with an annoyed pout, frustrated that he never mentioned coming to school and is now pretending to be a stranger. Ragna leans close and whispers that she is cute, leaving Musee completely frozen. Musee fumes with rage, her frustration reaching its limit. She wonders why he is acting like this in the first place. Two male students suddenly rush over and grab Ragna, asking if they can speak with him. Musee watches in surprise. They drag Ragna away, warning him to stop sitting beside Musee because His Highness claims she summoned the evil dragon. Ragna looks confused, while Musee silently thinks that they are lecturing the evil dragon himself. Musee lowers her gaze, hurt by how Ragna is treating her like a stranger, even if she understands why he has to do it. Musee slams a hand against the desk before turning and walking out through the classroom doors. Aliciella suddenly bumps into Musee outside, leaving both girls startled. Aliciella quickly regains her composure and greets Lady Musee with a sweet smile. Musee recognizes Aliciella Machillis, her heart pounding as she wonders why she is here when they belong to different classes. Musee clenches her trembling fist as Aliciella notices her sudden agitation. A sly snicker escapes Aliciella behind her hand before she instantly replaces it with an innocent expression. Aliciella grabs Ragna's arm with a bright, blushing smile and happily calls out to Lord Ragna. Musee stares in shock from the doorway, unable to believe what she is seeing. Aliciella excitedly mentions hearing about Ragna's transfer and suggests they have lunch together. Musee watches in growing panic, wondering why Aliciella is already clinging to him and if history is about to repeat itself. A painful memory flashes through Musee's mind as she recalls Aliciella happily holding hands with Alfred. She fears Aliciella is about to steal someone else from her all over again. Musee's painful memory twists into a new nightmare as Aliciella holds Ragna's hand instead. She stands frozen, tears welling up in her wide eyes. Musee suddenly runs away as Ragna turns toward the doorway and calls her name, while Aliciella keeps hold of his arm and cheerfully calls him Lord Ragna. Aliciella watches her leave with a smug smile and asks where she is going, while Ragna clicks his tongue in annoyance. Musee races down the dark hallway, desperately telling herself that she refuses to see any more of this. She nearly crashes into Alfred and quickly bows her head before rushing past him, leaving him to watch her disappear. Musee realizes that having Ragna by her side was all she ever needed. Aliciella gives Ragna a soft, blushing smile, but he responds with a serious look. Musee collapses onto the stone ground outside, her hair falling over her back as she wonders through her tears why this is happening. The day before school starts, the scene shifts to the castle. The king takes a short break before entering the room, only to gasp when he sees who is inside. Ragna sits by the window with an open book and slyly tells the king he is late. The king demands to know who he is. Ragna casually introduces himself as the evil dragon. The king stares in disbelief. Ragna calmly says he has something to discuss with him. Ragna reveals that Victor tried to kill Musee by selling her to a human trafficker. He then asks if the king received an official report about the incident. The king explains that Victor was found with several broken ribs in an abandoned building, and the report blamed the evil dragon and Musee Schnorr. The king cannot believe Victor would do such a thing. Ragna clicks his tongue, annoyed that he went easy on Victor, and doubts the king's explanation. A gag order was placed on everything involving the evil dragon and his relationship with Musee. Since Ragna had requested permission to live with our girl in the country, their negotiations were kept as a state secret. Ragna points out that Victor, the prime minister's son, knew everything about them. He adds that everyone targeted after Musee admired the hidden saint, Aliciella Machillis. The king gasps in shock, admitting he never knew Aliciella was a saint. Ragna listens quietly, his sharp gaze fixed on the king. He suspects someone is pulling the strings from behind the scenes. Whoever is behind it has been targeting Musee for some reason, and even monitoring her movements. Tomorrow, our girl will start school, where both her attackers and the so-called saint will be waiting. Ragna firmly declares that he wants to attend the academy as well. The king agrees, suggesting they handle the matter in secret. Ragna smiles confidently, pleased that they reached an agreement so quickly. He promises to report back once he uncovers more. The king gives the evil dragon his full trust. The Grand Academy stands beneath the open sky. Thanks to the king, Ragna managed to enroll without any trouble. Behind his glasses, he smirks as he recalls how treating Musee like a stranger kept her at a distance while giving him the satisfaction of seeing her angry. Musee lowers her gaze, lost in thought. A delighted smile crosses Ragna's face as his thoughts turn to Musee. He reflects on the strange but irresistible feeling of having a deep connection with our girl, wondering how she must be feeling about it. Ragna quickly adjusts to his new surroundings, amazed that he ended up here right after such an intense experience. Aliciella closes her eyes with a sweet smile as she clings to Ragna's arm. Ragna shoots Aliciella a furious glare from behind his glasses. He points out that this is their first meeting, but Aliciella simply giggles and says it does not matter. Aliciella squeezes Ragna's arm and quietly reveals that she already knows who he is. With a bright smile, she asks if they should have lunch together. Ragna narrows his eyes, growing even more suspicious of her. Alfred calls out to Aliciella from the doorway, making her pause. Alfred nervously repeats her name as she casually acknowledges him. Aliciella turns toward Alfred without letting go of Ragna's arm. She smiles confidently and tells Alfred not to worry, reminding him who she is. Aliciella assures him that getting along with Ragna will be easy because she finds him cute. Alfred smiles warmly, saying he trusts her judgment. Behind his glasses, Ragna watches them with a sharp, calculating smirk. Aliciella smiles serenely, realizing she finally understands what Musee has been doing after seeing it for herself. Ragna pulls his hand away and rejects her offer, warning that there is already someone he likes and he does not want Musee to misunderstand him. Aliciella brightly asks if he means Lady Musee, pointing out that Musee ran out of the classroom after seeing them together. She innocently claims Musee would want them to get along, making Ragna's eyebrow twitch with annoyance. Aliciella cheerfully adds that Ragna will eventually like her more than Musee. Ragna finally loses his patience and harshly tells her to shut up. Aliciella gasps as he shoves her hand away, unleashing a terrifying dark aura. Students passing by recoil in shock as the dark mist pours from the room, making them gag from the overwhelming pressure. Ragna's eyes glow like a reptile behind his glasses as he calls her a foolish woman and declares that he is nobody's puppet. Aliciella covers her mouth in horror while Alfred trembles beside her, surrounded by Ragna's swirling shadows. Aliciella lowers her hand and suddenly bursts into unsettling laughter. She finds the situation incredible, claiming that despite a few unexpected twists, everything is unfolding exactly as she predicted. Ragna narrows his eyes behind his glasses, fixating on one word: scenario. Aliciella reaches toward him with a sly smile, assuring him that everything is fine because she will always stay by his side. Ragna's eyes glow fiercely as a heavy wave of dark aura sweeps through the room. The force suddenly sends Aliciella crashing into the wall. Ragna storms out of the room, clutching his head, while Alfred rushes to Aliciella's side. He covers his mouth in frustration, desperate to see Musee and wondering if he is finally losing his mind. Outside, Musee sits alone beside the courtyard fountain as students pass by. Tears well up in our girl's eyes as she admits she could not stand seeing Aliciella touch Ragna. Musee realizes this pain feels nothing like what she experienced with Alfred. For the first time, she understands how painful love can be. As our girl wipes away her tears, footsteps approach and a voice asks what she is doing. A group of male students gathers in the courtyard, staring toward Musee. Yuri stands at the front, fixing her with a stern gaze. Musee looks up in surprise and softly calls out to Yuri Schnorr. She recognizes him as the youngest of the 4 Schnorr siblings and her little brother. Yuri turns away and coldly tells her not to say his name. He angrily scolds Musee for crying in public, calling her a disgrace to the Earls before insulting her. Musee grips the fountain's stone edge and stares at him in disbelief, asking if he really just called her that. Yuri cheerfully doubles down, saying that no matter what the king ordered, bringing another man into her home makes her exactly that. Something inside Musee snaps as her tear-filled eye freezes in shock. The other students mock her, laughing as they ask if she has been bringing men home and suggest she play with them too. Tears stream down our girl's face as she wonders why one horrible thing after another keeps happening to her. She feels herself breaking apart, unable to endure any more pain. Musee forces a strained smile and lets out a hollow laugh. The 3 boys fall silent, their faces flushing as they are caught off guard by her unexpected reaction. She keeps laughing through her tears, sarcastically asking if she must be hurting them that badly. Musee admits that if she were not hurting, she would never have come close to being killed. More than anything, she hates this pain. Overwhelmed by despair, Musee cries that she wants to die, but Ragna suddenly shouts from across the courtyard, reminding her that he told her never to say that. Ragna stands beneath the arched walkway, staring across the courtyard at our girl. Ragna leans against the stone pillar, watching Musee with a tense expression. He takes a step forward and softly calls her name, assuring her that he is right there. Musee suddenly yells at him to stay away, leaving Ragna stunned. Tears stream down her face as she refuses to let herself be touched by a man who has been touched by another woman. Furious and heartbroken, Musee reminds him that they are supposed to be complete strangers anyway, leaving him speechless. With tears in her eyes, she admits that she hates unkind people. Snowflakes suddenly drift across the courtyard, leaving the students staring at the sky in confusion. A violent blizzard erupts as Ragna pushes through the heavy snow toward Musee. Yuri shivers from the sudden cold, completely baffled by the unexpected blizzard. Ragna reaches toward Musee, anxiously calling her name and begging her to let him explain. Musee firmly warns Ragna not to address her so casually, when they are supposed to be complete strangers. Tears well up behind Ragna's glasses as he begs her to wait. He insists he is serious, apologizing as he admits that his heart is breaking and he cannot bear the thought of her hating him. Ragna clasps his hands and tearfully apologizes again, while Musee remains silent. Musee softens, realizing there must be a reason he was treating her like a stranger. She admits that she hates being treated that way, making Ragna anxiously call her name. Blushing through her tears, Musee finally confesses that she hates seeing another woman touch Ragna when he is supposed to be hers. Musee stares in surprise as Ragna covers his mouth, struggling to contain his laughter. Flustered, she asks why he is laughing so much. A deep blush spreads across Ragna's face as he asks if her confession was basically a declaration of love. Musee freezes in shock as her face turns bright red, suddenly realizing what she just admitted. Ragna spreads his arms with a huge smile, overjoyed that Musee called him hers. He happily declares that he loves her. Musee holds up her hand and firmly refuses to let him touch her after another woman touched him, leaving Ragna in distress. Ragna asks if washing himself with cold water would fix it. Musee hesitates before reluctantly agreeing. He immediately climbs onto the fountain and steps straight into the spraying water, leaving Musee completely stunned. Ragna stands drenched beneath the fountain, removes his glasses, and gives Musee a calm, handsome look. He tosses aside his glasses and shirt as he steps out of the fountain, proudly announcing that he is clean. Ragna pulls Musee into a warm embrace and sincerely apologizes. He explains that he had plans to protect her reputation, but promises never to treat her like a stranger again if it hurts her this much. Musee rests against his chest, her eyes widening as she begins to wonder what was really going on. Ragna gently holds the back of her head and firmly assures her that he could never fall for that woman. Over Musee's shoulder, Ragna glares coldly as he recalls Aliciella saying she would take her place at his side. He pulls Musee closer, furious that Aliciella spoke as if replacing her was perfectly normal. To him, nobody could ever take her place. His eyes darken as he admits he actually thought he was losing his mind. Ragna gently cradles Musee's face and kisses her, confessing that he cannot imagine a future without her. He lifts her chin and gazes into her eyes, softly calling her name. Musee suddenly notices the three boys collapsed nearby, barely conscious. Ragna complains that she ignored his kiss, but she snaps back that this is hardly the time for that. Ragna sighs and decides to heal them. He channels magic through his glowing hand while keeping Musee close. A sardonic smile crosses his face as he explains that healing magic is not his specialty, but it works surprisingly well when he thinks about Musee, making her blush. The boys slowly sit up, confused by what happened. Despite being caught in a blizzard, they now feel as warm as spring. Yuri looks up in surprise as Musee kneels beside him, still held close by Ragna, and asks where it hurts. Tears fill Yuri's eyes before he suddenly lunges at Musee, hugging her tightly and desperately apologizing for what he said. The other students stare at each other in disbelief, horrified by the cruel things they said to Lady Musee and unable to understand why they acted that way. Musee can only stare in confusion as Yuri continues sobbing beside her. Ragna gives a knowing smile, admitting that her confusion is understandable. Ragna narrows his eyes with a sharp smirk and reveals the truth. Everyone had been brainwashed. Deep inside the castle lies a special room that only the king can enter. With nothing but a bookshelf, a chair, and a table, it serves as his private sanctuary. Freddy is stunned when Musee cheerfully wishes him good morning, while Ragna clings to her from behind like he never plans to let go. Freddy cannot understand how Musee managed to tame the evil dragon so peacefully. He asks her what she did to him, leaving our girl completely speechless. Ragna squeezes Musee tighter and says he is simply replenishing his Musee energy. She relays his words to Freddy, who can only awkwardly accept the explanation. Musee explains that school has been cancelled because of the abnormal weather from a few days ago. The sudden blizzard was actually Ragna's doing, but the students have still been ordered to stay home. Her earlier words about hating unkind people clearly struck Ragna harder than expected. Since then, he refuses to leave Musee's side, clinging to her even in their private room. Ragna gently reminds Musee to call him Ragna while he is in human form. If people recognize him as the evil dragon, he will never be able to move around freely. Freddy is stunned by this level of sincerity. Letting Musee call him by his true name proves just how much Ragna trusts her, though Freddy can only huff in disbelief. Ragna suddenly gets serious and says they should cut to the chase. After infiltrating the academy, he discovered what was really happening there, including the truth about the hidden saint, Aliciella Machilus. Aliciella has completely taken control of the school. Musee and Freddy are both stunned by the revelation. Musee asks if Aliciella really has enough influence to control the entire academy. Ragna clarifies that she did not achieve this through social influence. Instead, Aliciella used her magic and skills to brainwash the entire school. Freddy is completely baffled. Humans cannot use magic, so he demands to know what Ragna means by skills. Ragna adjusts his glasses and explains that he first needs to cover what skills and saints actually are. Meanwhile, Musee quietly finds his choice of eyewear amusing. According to Ragna's notes, skills are special talents granted by God, such as extraordinary intelligence or charisma, that help advance the world and allow their users to achieve remarkable feats. Saints possess several unique skills, including fertility, healing, and seduction. Freddy wonders if Aliciella used her seduction skill to brainwash the students. Ragna explains that while a saint's skills are powerful, seduction alone could never cause such an extreme effect. Ragna narrows his reptilian eye and reveals the real reason: Aliciella is using magic. The human brain cannot properly process magic. It simply overloads, making humans incapable of using it. However, extremely rare irregularities can create a glitch in God's grand design. And Aliciella happens to be one of those glitches. Freddy asks if this glitch is what allowed Aliciella to use magic and take over the academy. Ragna agrees, then adds that she also received an unusually terrible divine gift. Musee asks what he means by a divine gift. Ragna explains that Aliciella received a small fragment of another divine power, separate from ordinary magic. He does not know exactly what her gift is, but the possibilities are limited. Aliciella's claim that everything happened according to her predictions, combined with Musee's 5 previous lives, gives Ragna enough clues to connect the dots. Ragna reaches a chilling conclusion. Aliciella's power is either precognition or the ability to travel through time. Freddy is horrified by the idea. He cannot understand why Aliciella would stop at one school when she could use such a powerful ability to conquer the entire country. Ragna explains that divine power comes with a serious limitation. Human vessels deteriorate when they use it, meaning these abilities can only be used a limited number of times. The human body also limits how much magic and divine power Aliciella can wield. Even with her seduction skill, spreading her magic across the entire academy was already pushing her limits. That is why Aliciella surrounded herself with charismatic pawns and influential students, using them to strengthen her control over the academy. However, Alfred, Jean, and Victor received a much stronger form of brainwashing because they were the ones who targeted Musee. Musee's eyes widen as she processes the revelation about the 3 men who once targeted her. Ragna points out that Alfred, Jean, and Victor are only the 3 they know about. There could easily be more victims. Fortunately, Aliciella's normal brainwashing can be broken by a powerful shock. Ragna's blizzard had already snapped several students back to their senses. Since Aliciella's abilities come from a glitch in the system, her magic cannot be detected unless someone actually witnesses her using it. The same applies to anyone she has brainwashed, making them just as impossible to detect. Ragna explains that physical contact is another exception. If someone touches Aliciella while she casts her magic, they can detect it. Musee looks confused as Ragna rests against her shoulder, his expression turning serious. He points out that Aliciella's body and mind are both fundamentally different. Musee asks what he means. Ragna explains that Aliciella's mind is a chaotic mess, possibly because of her repeated use of divine power, making her difficult even for him to understand. In the simplest terms, Ragna says her mind is disgusting. Musee shudders as she realizes Aliciella gave her the exact same feeling. That unsettling presence was the source of the fear she could never explain. Freddy asks what countermeasures Ragna has planned. Ragna simply smiles while keeping Musee close. Then he cheerfully admits that he has absolutely no plan. Freddy is left completely speechless as Ragna happily repeats that he has not thought of anything. Ragna turns serious again. They know Aliciella is using brainwashing magic, but they still have no idea what she actually wants. Ragna still cannot figure out why Aliciella is brainwashing people or why she keeps targeting Musee. Freddy solemnly agrees. There is no question that Musee is her target. Ragna refuses to act until he understands Aliciella's true objective. But he will not forgive her for targeting Musee, and if she tries again, he will strike back. For now, protecting Musee comes first. Ragna suggests finding an ally who can help them deal with Aliciella. Ideally, they need someone with a powerful skill who is completely immune to her brainwashing before making their move. Ragna cheerfully tells Freddy to stay out of it and be a good little king. Once the time comes to act, he will have plenty of work to do. Freddy sighs and asks if Ragna sees him as just another pawn. Ragna cheerfully admits that he does. Later, Ragna serves tea while Musee asks if he can also detect people's skills. He casually confirms that he can because he is the evil dragon. Musee asks if Aliciella's brainwashing can affect him. Ragna confidently assures her that human brainwashing magic could never work on him. Ragna sets his teacup down and brings up Aliciella again. His expression darkens as he reveals the horrifying truth. Aliciella used the worst kind of magic, forcing him to love her and hate Musee enough to kill her. Musee thanks him for the tea and jokes that there is almost nothing he cannot do. Ragna quickly disagrees, insisting there is at least one thing he cannot do. He leans over her and gently cups her head, admitting that he could not hold her in his arms the moment he wanted to. Musee stares up at him in surprise, completely caught off guard. Ragna then smirks and admits there is another thing he cannot do, simply kidnap Musee and lock her away somewhere where only the two of them can stay. His words leave our girl bright red. Musee looks away shyly and assures him that she has no intention of running away. Ragna smiles, saying he already figured that. Still, he admits he could never stand the thought of Musee loving another man more than him. With a possessive smirk, Ragna warns her to remember that he would have no problem locking her away if necessary. Musee squeaks in embarrassment as he leans closer and gently holds her face. Ragna points out a disturbing pattern in Musee's memories. In all 4 previous lives, her engagement was broken off shortly before she was killed, and both events happened at nearly the same time. A memory shows Musee at the Academy's annual dance, where she broke off her engagement herself in this life. Musee covers her mouth in horror as the memories fall into place. Every previous murder happened after her engagement was cancelled, around the time she was supposed to graduate. Ragna realizes Aliciella must have a specific reason for needing Musee dead at that exact point. He drops a sugar cube into his tea and explains that if they can survive past that critical period, they may be able to stop Aliciella's plan. That means Musee only has to survive for about 3 more months. Ragna gives her a confident smirk. If she makes it past those 3 months, they win this battle. Musee stares at him as the significance of his plan finally sinks in. Outside the academy, Jean Bista turns around after someone calls his full name. A student with a notebook asks Jean how his training as a guard for Duke Remblu's household is going. The teacher pats Jean on the shoulder and asks if he is taking his guard training seriously. Jean calmly assures him that he is. Then a nearby student points out that Lady Musee is right there, causing Jean to freeze. Jean nervously apologizes and quickly excuses himself, leaving the teacher completely confused. He rushes down the hallway, determined to stay away from Musee. Something about being near her makes him feel like he is losing control again. Suddenly, dizziness overwhelms Jean as his vision twists and blurs. He drops to his knees against the wall, clutching his face as he remembers the terrifying feeling of someone else controlling his body. Jean forces himself back up and remembers his upbringing as a knight. His family had served the nation for generations, and their pride had been instilled in him since childhood. A memory shows his father teaching him to raise his sword not to kill, but to protect and help others live. Young Jean trains with a wooden sword under his father's watchful eye, carrying that knightly pride deep within his heart. But the memories shatter as Jean sees himself drawing his blade against a defenseless Musee, forced to confront the horrifying act he was driven to commit. Jean shudders in terror as the truth of what he did finally sinks in. He presses his head against the wall, unable to believe he once raised his sword against a woman. Jean realizes that whenever he gets near Musee, he starts to lose his mind. His thoughts become hazy, as if some unseen force is taking control of him. An unbearable urge once commanded him to grab his sword and tear Musee apart. Jean desperately wants to apologize, but he knows he will only hurt her again if they meet. Avoiding her is the only way he can protect her. He turns away in despair, disgusted by the feeling of his own mind and body refusing to obey him. Jean clutches his head and silently begs for someone to save him. A sharp clack echoes through the corridor. Jean looks up in surprise as someone steps into his path. Ragna stands in the archway, dressed in his school uniform and glasses, calmly looking down at Jean. Ragna casually greets Jean, who can barely stay upright. Jean wonders if he has come for revenge. Jean reaches out with a trembling hand and begs Ragna to punish him however he sees fit. Tears fill Jean's eyes as he begs Ragna to free him from whatever is controlling his mind and body. Overwhelmed, Jean collapses onto the stone floor and lies motionless before him. When classes resume, Jean sits at his desk and keeps staring at Musee, making her sweat uncomfortably. With school back in session, Ragna drops his dense act and casually sits beside Musee, instantly standing out among the other students. Classes barely progress because the teacher is completely captivated by Ragna. Even better, his overwhelming presence seems to break Aliciella's brainwashing, as another student suddenly regains his senses. At noon, Musee points out how bored Ragna looked during class. He immediately asks where they should have lunch. A A student suddenly bursts through the classroom doors with shocking news from the morning's sword-fighting class. He nervously tells Ragna and Musee that Crown Prince Reed raised his sword against his own servant, Carlos. He urgently reports that during morning sword training, Crown Prince Reed raised his blade against his own servant, Carlos. Musee recalls that both general education and service students attend the same sword training sessions. The male students train with swords for emergencies, while the female students stay in class to practice needlework. Another student asks why Reed would attack Carlos, so he explains what the other students witnessed. Aliciella had slipped away from her class and wandered into the sword training grounds, where the students were practicing. Carlos spots Aliciella peeking through the door, while she innocently watches the training inside. Suddenly, a practice sword flies straight toward her. Carlos quickly steps in and blocks the blade with his own sword, then demands to know why she came here when women aren't supposed to be in the training area. Aliciella thanks him with teary eyes, but her words leave Carlos grimacing as an unpleasant sensation suddenly hits him. Carlos recoils in disgust and clutches his face as Aliciella watches in silence. Reed glares at him from across the training floor. Reed raises his sword and demands to know how Carlos dares call Aliciella disgusting. Carlos flinches as the prince confronts him. Carlos reacts instantly, kicking Reed hard in the abdomen to defend himself. Reed crashes to the ground in pain as the surrounding students shout in shock. Carlos regrets forgetting to hold back his strength. The student explains that Reed was taken to the guest hall lounge, while Carlos was sent to the medical office. Meanwhile, Ragna grins slyly at the report. Ragna realizes they have found the perfect pawn without having to lift a finger. He explains to Musee that Carlos felt nauseous just from looking at Aliciella, proving he naturally resists her magic. Ragna adds that Carlos's brain fought against the brainwashing, causing his body to react with physical discomfort. With their target identified, Ragna decides to visit Carlos at the medical office immediately. Ragna throws open the medical office doors and loudly asks the startled staff member if Carlos is there, with Musee following behind him. Musee scolds Ragna for shouting, but the nurse quickly orders them out. Ragna ignores her and pulls back a curtain, finding Carlos inside. Musee notices how pale Carlos looks as he lies on the medical bed. Ragna agrees as they stand beside him. Carlos breathes heavily as a faint glow surrounds him. His eyes slowly open as he regains consciousness. Carlos rubs his head and asks where he is. Musee greets him with a polite smile and wishes him a good morning. He suddenly sits up after seeing Lady Musee, then freezes when he notices the unfamiliar man beside her. Carlos asks who he is, so Ragna calmly introduces himself as the evil dragon Ragna and points out that this is their first meeting. Carlos looks away nervously, sweat running down his cheek as he quietly mutters that he knew it. Musee wonders how Carlos already knows about Ragna and where he could have heard about him. Ragna smirks and cuts straight to the point, asking if Carlos has been secretly watching them. Carlos clicks his tongue and darkens his expression, while Musee gasps at Ragna's sudden accusation. Ragna reminds Carlos that he was there when Musee was abducted by the Prime Minister's son. He then reveals that Crown Prince Reed was the one who ordered Carlos to keep watch on them. Ragna asks if Carlos's master has been acting strangely ever since meeting Aliciella. Carlos stares at him in shock, sweating as the implication sinks in. Musee grows anxious, wondering if Carlos even realizes that the woman Ragna means is Lady Aliciella. Ragna suspects that Reed may have fallen under Aliciella's brainwashing as well. Carlos gasps, asking if Master Reed has truly been brainwashed. Musee immediately realizes that it must be true. Reed somehow knew about the top-secret existence of the evil dragon, which would explain everything if Aliciella had brainwashed him. Musee steps closer and asks Carlos if she can ask him something. He hesitantly agrees. Our girl looks at him earnestly and asks why Aliciella is trying to kill her. Carlos stays silent, gripping the bedsheet tightly as Musee's question leaves him visibly shaken. Tears well up in Carlos's eyes as he struggles to answer Musee's question. Carlos recalls his childhood when he belonged to a secretive group that few people even knew existed. Young Carlos grips a small blade as he remembers his past. It was a brutal world of assassinations and black market dealings, where bloodshed was simply answered with more bloodshed. One day, Carlos failed an assassination attempt and was captured. Young Carlos sits bound with ropes as guards surround him with spears. An older official orders them to dispose of the captured assassin. Suddenly, a young voice rings out, ordering the guards to stop. Young Reed steps forward and points out that the captured assassin is the same age as him. Reed places a hand over his chest and begs the official to let him personally retrain the young assassin. He pleads for Carlos's life, leaving the young boy staring at him in stunned disbelief. Carlos reflects on the irony that the person who saved his life was the very person he had been sent to kill. Carlos remembers Reed as a noble man who seemed destined to become a great king. He was kind-hearted and deeply respected the value of human life. But everything changed during their third year at the academy when Reed met a new student. That student was none other than Aliciella Michaelis. Aliciella was born to a gardener and a viscount's daughter who had eloped. After her parents died in an accident, her viscount grandfather took her in despite having no other family. She quickly fit in at the academy, and before long, everyone treated her like a princess. No matter what Aliciella said, the students always agreed with her and eagerly carried out her wishes. Even the proud viscounts happily did her bidding, while Carlos watched the strange behavior from a distance. Yet while everyone else seemed enchanted by her, being near Aliciella only made Carlos feel deeply uncomfortable. Among her most devoted followers were Lord Victor, Lord Jean, and Lord Alfred, who followed her around like loyal servants. The fourth person completely devoted to Aliciella was Crown Prince Reed himself. To Carlos, Aliciella was a poisonous flower who drove men mad, with her admirers constantly showering her with roses and obeying her every whim. Carlos grips his shoulder as he remembers the day that poisonous woman approached him directly. Aliciella leaned close and mockingly told him he would be devastated when Reed eventually ordered him to kill again. She then flashed an unsettling smile and promised Carlos that she would always remain by his side. Carlos shudders at the memory, her words still haunting him. He cannot believe Reed would ever give such a cruel order. After all, the prince was the one who saved him and freed him from his life of darkness. In the past, Reed cheerfully sipped tea as he ordered Carlos to keep watch over Lady Musee and her companion. He even gave Carlos permission to use his old assassin skills, warning that he might have to kill them if necessary. Carlos was stunned by the order and asked if Reed was doing this because Lady Aliciella wanted it. Reed cheerfully dismisses the idea, insisting that Aliciella is a saint who would never ask him to kill anyone. With a gentle, almost love-struck smile, Reed insists that he is acting entirely of his own free will. Carlos realizes that Reed's smile looks like that of a man completely in love. In the end, Aliciella's prediction came true. She had destroyed the very qualities that once made Reed fit to be king. Back in the medical office, Carlos sincerely apologizes to Musee and Ragna for spying on them, explaining that he was only following orders. Tears stream down his face as he admits that all he wants is a respectable life, far away from the painful memories of his past. Carlos lowers his head, admitting that these are only excuses because he could have ended up killing Musee. She listens quietly. Musee gives him a gentle look and forgives him for telling them the truth. Then it clicks for our girl. The mysterious figure who killed her in her first life was Carlos, acting on Reed's orders. Ragna leans closer and demands that Carlos reveal what Aliciella did throughout Musee's 4 previous lives. Carlos freezes at Ragna's question, clearly caught off guard. He grabs his head in disbelief, wondering if the entire school has been brainwashed and whether something like that is even possible. Ragna presses him for answers, asking how much he truly knows about Aliciella. Carlos explains that Reed called her a hidden saint and claims she possessed an ability similar to precognition. Ragna recalls his own encounter with Aliciella when she spoke as though events were unfolding exactly as she had predicted. At first, Ragna assumed she had the power of precognition. But after hearing Carlos's story and considering Musee's past, he begins to suspect something far more complicated. Ragna now believes Aliciella used some kind of time travel ability to begin this 5th life. Carlos asks why he thinks it is time travel instead of precognition. Ragna explains that precognition should only reveal information about the person using it. So if Aliciella knew Carlos's future, the simplest explanation was that she had already lived through it in an earlier timeline. Musee listens carefully as Ragna explains that, despite having no magical abilities, she regained memories of her 4 previous lives to counter Aliciella's impossible actions. Ragna explains that time travel must have a specific trigger. In this case, he believes Musee's death is what sends Aliciella back in time. In other words, Musee dying is the condition that allows Aliciella to reset the timeline. Musee sweat drops and wonders why her death would be the trigger. Ragna has no clear answer yet. The mystery only gets deeper. Aliciella is behind Musee's deaths, but Ragna still cannot explain how she knew time travel was possible in the first place, or why she is so obsessed with killing her. Carlos chuckles awkwardly, admitting there is still a huge amount they don't know. Musee notices that his speech has suddenly become much more casual. Ragna casually confirms that his full name is Carlos Flit, and Carlos calmly agrees. Carlos is caught off guard when Ragna suddenly offers him a chance to help them. Ragna points out that Carlos can resist Aliciella's brainwashing. If they play their cards right, Musee can survive, and Reed can finally break free from her influence. Carlos hesitates, reminding them that he is Reed's servant and could never betray his master. Musee calmly tells him that she does not care whether he helps them. She does not want to die, of course, but if it happens, then so be it. Ragna sighs and reminds Musee not to talk like that. He only wanted another useful pawn on their side, but as long as he can protect her, nothing else matters. Carlos suddenly bursts out laughing, leaving Ragna and Musee staring at him in confusion. Carlos realizes that whether he joins them or not hardly matters. The two of them are so genuine and straightforward that he cannot help but trust them. His loyalty to Reed still weighs on his mind. Even if saving the prince puts his own life at risk, Carlos decides it is worth it. Carlos breaks into a bright smile and agrees to help, joking that his decision should not cause them any trouble either way. Ragna smirks and teases him that he might even get the chance to deal with Aliciella himself. Carlos immediately rejects the idea with a cheerful laugh, making it clear he wants absolutely nothing to do with that. Elsewhere, several women lie motionless inside a dark, run-down brothel. One woman struggles to move as a sweet smell leaves her dizzy and weak. She can only lie there helplessly, silently begging for someone to save her. Thick, fragrant smoke fills the room as the women sit or curl up on a mattress, dazed and barely able to move. She stares ahead with hollow, tear-filled eyes, desperately wondering why these horrible things keep happening to her. King Freddy sits at his desk, wondering how he should handle the situation. Earlier, Ragna cheerfully demanded an audience with a saint, leaving Freddy with a request that is anything but easy to fulfill. The Church of Rhynecia is the world's largest religion, with nearly 90% of the population among its believers. It functions almost like an independent nation, so even a king rarely gets the chance to meet one of its saints. Freddy dips his quill into the inkwell and decides to request an audience, though he has no idea whether the church will agree. He puts pen to paper and hopes the task Ragna gave him goes smoothly. The sealed letter is addressed to Rayfan. At a large stone estate, Musee stirs beneath her bedsheets as she slowly wakes up. She remembers that school is closed today and happily wishes she could stay in bed a little longer. Our girl is already exhausted by everything going on. Aliciella is still chasing Ragna's attention while he continues using his charm to break the brainwashing around them. Musee rubs her sleepy eyes and realizes Ragna disappeared somewhere early this morning. She lies there alone, realizing how strange it feels to sleep by herself after getting so used to having someone beside her. Still, she worries that getting this close to a man before marriage might be improper. For noble women, even simple physical affection is considered improper during an engagement, let alone kissing. Musee wonders what she and Ragna really are. She questions whether they can honestly call themselves lovers. After all, Ragna confessed his feelings, held her close, and even called her his bride, but he never actually asked her to be his girlfriend. Blushing into her pillow, our girl admits she would rather stop sneaking around and have a proper relationship with him. A knock suddenly comes from the door. Yuri introduces himself from the other side, catching her attention. He apologizes for waking her and invites her to spend the day with him. Musee is surprised to learn that their older brother has also arrived for some sword training. Yuri excitedly explains that their brother will be training with some of his soldier friends and invites her to join them if she feels like it. Yuri excitedly announces that they have arrived at the garrison. Knights and soldiers both help maintain order in the country. While many knights serve at the royal palace, the soldiers mainly protect and assist ordinary civilians. Yuri rushes ahead with a grin and calls out to his brother, while Musee follows behind at a calmer pace. Their older brother turns from the other soldiers and greets them with a cheerful smile, especially happy to see Musee. Musee warmly greets him, saying it has been a while. He happily agrees as Yuri watches with a grin. Their older brother casually asks whether their father finally lifted the no-contact order, leaving Musee completely confused. Yuri quickly clarifies that their father never lifted it, but insists they have no reason to obey it. He points out that Ragna was ordered to live with them by the emperor himself, so none of this is Musee's fault. Their older brother laughs and agrees, while Musee awkwardly processes the fact that her father actually ordered everyone to stay away from her. She figures her father must be furious after her engagement fell apart, and she immediately brought another man home. Musee's sweat drops as she realizes her brothers just let the secret slip. Yuri shakes his head, calling their older brother dense as usual, while the soldiers watch. Her older brother flashes a bright smile and tells Musee to take a seat on the bench and watch their training. He calls Yuri over to start the match, while Musee settles onto the bench and waves to them with a warm smile. The brothers clash swords as Musee watches from the bench, while the other soldiers gather around to watch the spar. As the blades clash, she wonders if learning some swordsmanship would help her react when someone points a weapon at her. 3 men approach her, and the freckled one asks if she is Musee Schnorr. The freckled man leans closer with a smirk and crudely suggests becoming friends, claiming he heard she gets close to any man around her. Musee stares at him in stunned disbelief, completely thrown off by his rude remark. He arrogantly continues, claiming that those filthy men cannot give her everything she needs. Musee can barely believe what she is hearing as he shamelessly suggests she would sleep with anyone and bluntly demands that she sleep with them. Musee demands to know who started the rumor, but the man casually admits he has no idea. He smirks and says the rumors about her are already spreading everywhere. Musee grips her dress in frustration, wondering how long these rumors have been circulating without her knowing. She starts to wonder whether Aliciella has been brainwashing people outside school too, or if someone else is deliberately spreading lies about her. Musee glares at him and firmly denies his claim, insisting she has never been close with multiple men. She angrily points out that he is falsely painting her as an indecent woman who sleeps around. The freckled man looks confused by her reaction, as if he cannot understand why she finds his accusations strange. Instead of arguing further, Musee suddenly smiles and changes the subject. She cheerfully tells them there is only one man who loves her. A terrifying presence appears behind the freckled man as Musee calmly asks how that man would react if he heard what they were saying. Ragna suddenly strikes all three men down, leaving them sprawled on the ground as he lands with a sharp glare. The dark aura around him fades as Musee warmly welcomes him back, while the men remain frozen in shock. Ragna flashes her an affectionate smile and admits that he missed her. With the three men still on the ground, Musee asks whether they were brainwashed. Ragna shakes his head, making it clear that Aliciella had nothing to do with this. The freckled man fumes as Ragna bluntly calls them simple-minded idiots. Ragna mocks them for believing baseless rumors without a second thought, wondering who but an idiot would fall for something so ridiculous. Humiliated and furious, the freckled man curses at Ragna and charges at him with his fists raised. Ragna instantly drives his face into the dirt, leaving him gasping in pain. He keeps the man pinned down and calmly wonders if anyone who charges into a fight without first judging their opponent's strength is simply a fool. Ragna's pupils narrow as he flashes a sinister smile and asks if the man really wants to be slaughtered. Terrified by the threat, all three men cower and desperately beg for forgiveness. Ragna calmly asks whether he is really the one they should be apologizing to. They immediately realize their mistake, turn to Musee, and bow their heads as they sincerely apologize to her. From a distance, her older brother watches Ragna and Musee as the three men kneel before them. He is amazed by Ragna's strength, but Yuri reacts furiously the moment he recognizes him and rushes past his brother with his sword in hand. Yuri glares at Ragna and demands to know why he is here. He angrily declares that he has every reason to be mad at him. Ragna simply ignores him and sits beside Musee on the bench. Ragna rests his head on Musee's lap and complains that she wasn't there when he returned. Musee explains that Yuri invited her out, but Ragna pouts and insists she should have stayed home in his arms instead. Musee looks down in surprise when Ragna quietly asks if she felt lonely without him. He blushes as he admits that he gets lonely whenever she is away, while Musee listens quietly. Ragna's eyes narrow as he confesses that he cannot calm down without her by his side. Musee points out that he was the one who left her alone that morning. Ragna admits that's true, but insists this is different. He gently presses her hand against his cheek and explains that if anything happened to her while she was alone, he would not be there to protect her. Musee giggles and calls him her Prince Charming. Ragna turns away in embarrassment, muttering that an evil dragon is not supposed to be a prince. She smiles and agrees that being an evil dragon suits him much better. Ragna looks up from her lap with a warm smile and points out that she thinks about him more than anyone else. Musee leans closer with a gentle blush. Yuri suddenly loses it and yells at Ragna to stop trying to seduce his sister. Yuri fumes in rage while his older brother and the other soldiers stare in disbelief. Even Musee is caught off guard. Her older brother cheerfully asks whether Musee and Ragna are lovers. Musee freezes in embarrassment, while Ragna looks up from her lap and repeats the word in confusion. She explains that lovers are two people who share feelings for each other. Ragna turns to her and asks if that means they are lovers, catching her completely off guard. He gently cups her cheek and declares that she is his bride, and nothing will ever change that. Ragna then admits they have yet to make a formal vow, leaving Musee puzzled. He explains that a certain ceremony must take place before he can officially call her his bride. Ragna wonders if that means they are technically lovers for now. Yuri immediately raises a hand and tells him to stop. Yuri can barely believe Ragna actually made a move on his sister without even establishing a proper relationship first. Ragna simply nods, casually confirming Yuri's accusation without a hint of concern. Yuri stares at him in disbelief and asks if he is joking. Ragna only blinks back, completely unfazed, Yuri throws his hands up, insisting they cannot be lovers if they are not even engaged. Their older brother adds that if they are neither lovers nor engaged, they should not be touching like that. Ragna blinks in confusion, genuinely wondering why they cannot. Yuri tells him to use some common sense, warning that people will assume Musee has lost her chastity to a man she is not even dating. He explains that the rumors would ruin her reputation regardless of the truth, especially since she is his sister. Ragna sighs as he tries to understand human social rules, concluding that humans are far too complicated. He turns to Musee with a charming smile and casually suggests they get engaged right now, thinking that would solve everything. Yuri quickly shuts that down, explaining that simply asking Musee does not make them engaged. He insists the engagement must be formally proposed between their families, leaving Ragna completely confused. Ragna tilts his head, admitting that he still does not understand how any of this works. He concludes that their only option is to visit his guarantor, leaving Musee surprised that he even has one. When she asks who it is, Ragna pauses to think before answering. An older man sits sternly in an ornate chair, as Ragna reveals that his guarantor is the king's younger brother. Musee and Ragna must meet his guardian, the king's younger brother, before they can officially become engaged. Inside Duke Inzia's residence, Musee sits beside Ragna in the spacious guest room, her heart pounding with nerves. Ragna asks if she's nervous. Musee blushes and admits that anyone would feel anxious about meeting the king's brother. Ragna calmly closes his eyes and reassures her that the king's brother is still just a human being, so there's no need to be afraid. Duke Gustav Inzia is the king's younger brother and most trusted right-hand man. His unwavering support is a major reason behind the king's long and stable reign. Ragna senses someone approaching and casually remarks that their guest has arrived. Musee nervously turns toward the door. The door creaks open as heavy footsteps enter the room. Duke Gustav steps inside, his cold and intimidating gaze fixed on them. Gustav furiously demands to know how Ragna dares show his face there, but Ragna only responds with an unbothered smirk. Ragna casually raises a hand from the sofa and asks whether Gustav would really prefer never to see him again. Gustav angrily demands to know who Ragna thinks is serving as his guardian. He berates Ragna for having no proper education or family background, leaving his social standing highly questionable. Gustav says he only accepted the role on his brother's orders and would gladly see Ragna expelled. Gustav accuses Ragna of caring only about his own reputation. Ragna counters that someone of low status would hardly worry about such trivial matters. Enraged by the disrespect, Gustav orders Ragna to watch his mouth. The shouting startles Musee, prompting her to rise and nervously interrupt the argument. Musee curtsies politely and introduces herself as Musee Schnorr, the second daughter of Earl Schnorr. Gustav narrows his eyes, recognizing her as the woman who recently broke off her engagement with Alfred. He wonders how she has already grown so close to another man. Musee turns to Gustav and politely apologizes for their sudden visit. Musee politely explains that they have something important they would like to ask of him. Gustav coldly cuts her off, refusing to hear anything from someone of her standing. Musee freezes as a cold sweat forms on her face, overwhelmed by shock and dread. She lowers her head and timidly apologizes, but Ragna's eyes narrow as dark smoke begins to rise from him. A suffocating dark aura fills the room as Ragna coldly calls Gustav a little brat, leaving him trembling in shock. Ragna fixes Gustav with a fierce glare and declares that a lowly human has no right to speak to his bride that way. Gustav breaks into a cold sweat, barely able to believe what he just heard. He stammers out a question, asking if Ragna truly called Musee his bride. Gustav explodes in anger, demanding to know how Ragna could call a woman whose engagement was just cancelled his bride. He tells Ragna that his absurdity has gone far enough. Ragna remains completely unbothered, muttering about what a pain humans are. Ragna huffs that Gustav's reaction is typical of humans. Musee gives a nervous smile, admitting she often forgets how ordinary people react when she's around him. Ragna gets straight to the point, asking for approval to marry into the Schnorr family. He makes it clear that his bride will be Musee. Gustav erupts in rage, demanding to know if Ragna really thinks he would ever allow him to get engaged. Musee lowers her eyes, realizing this is exactly how she expected things to go. She considers how Ragna's carefree behavior comes across as incredibly rude by human standards, making Gustav's rejection understandable for a strict noble like him. A sly snicker escapes Musee as she realizes Gustav has picked the wrong person to challenge, catching him completely off guard. Gustav glares at her and demands to know what she finds so amusing. Musee smiles serenely and brushes him off, saying she was simply thinking that she feels a little sorry for him. Gustav starts shouting in fury, demanding to know what she just said, but his voice suddenly cuts off. Pure terror flashes across Gustav's face as his eyes widen in shock and confusion. Sweat pours down his face as he desperately gasps for air, clutching his chest while realizing he can no longer breathe. Ragnar sits comfortably with his arms crossed, calmly revealing that he erased the air around Gustav. Musee turns to him and calmly reminds him that Gustav will die if he takes things too far. Ragnar flashes a chilling smirk and asks why he should care about Gustav's life when the Duke is simply annoying. Musee thinks for a moment before calmly asking Ragnar to stop, while Gustav continues choking behind them. Ragnar looks at her sharply and asks why he should spare the Duke. Musee admits she does not care if Gustav dies, but his death would create trouble that could disrupt her life with Ragnar. She would rather avoid that. Ragnar admits she has a point and snaps his fingers, instantly restoring the air as the dark aura fades and Gustav gasps for breath. Gustav clutches his throat as he catches his breath, still in shock as he demands to know who Ragnar really is. Ragnar scoffs and suggests that if Gustav refuses to approve their engagement, he should have simply gone to the other man from the start. Gustav wonders who he means, but Ragnar raises a hand and tears open a rift in space, filling the room with dark magic. The rift opens inside the royal office, catching King Freddy completely off guard as he freezes at his desk. Ragnar casually waves at the king through the portal, prompting Freddy to shout in disbelief and demand an explanation. Gustav stands flabbergasted as his brother appears out of thin air. Ragnar casually gestures toward him and explains that Gustav refused to approve the engagement, so he decided to ask the king directly. Freddy clutches his head in exhaustion, already imagining the kind of trouble that must have happened. Freddy firmly orders Gustav to grant whatever Ragnar wants, warning that his actions could directly affect the nation's future. Gustav can only stare in confusion, wondering what he means. Freddy explains that Gustav should understand once he considers what Ragnar's ability to use magic means. He refuses to say more, revealing that the matter is classified as a top secret. As the reality sinks in, Gustav nervously looks at Ragnar and reluctantly agrees to arrange the engagement. Through the portal, Freddy takes the opportunity to share an important piece of news with Ragnar. He announces that their meeting with a saint has officially been scheduled. 1 week later, Freddy, Ragnar, and Musee gather in a grand parlor at Reincarnation Church, with Carlos standing guard behind them. Freddy turns to Carlos in surprise, admitting he had no idea Carlos knew about the situation. Carlos awkwardly apologizes to His Majesty. A sudden knock echoes from the parlor doors, drawing Musee and Ragnar's attention. A voice from behind the grand double doors announces that the saint has arrived. Saint Victoria Raymond enters with Leona, gracefully apologizing to His Majesty for keeping him waiting before taking her seat. Victoria looks directly at Ragnar and calmly declares that he must be the evil dragon. Ragnar smirks behind his glasses, his eyes gleaming as he notes that Victoria has already figured out who he is. Victoria calmly explains that his sinister aura made it difficult to miss. She then wonders why the church's protective spells against evil spirits failed to keep him out. Ragnar asks if she really thought such a minor barrier could stop him. Victoria closes her eyes and admits she knew from the start that it would never be enough. Ragnar watches her with a smirk, wondering if she can measure the power of others. Freddy rises from his armchair and asks about the woman standing quietly behind Victoria. Victoria introduces the woman in black as her personal attendant, Leona. Victoria politely asks if Leona may remain in the room. Freddy readily gives his permission. Freddy gets straight to the point and formally asks Victoria and Leona for their assistance. Victoria touches a finger to her chin as she processes the information, acknowledging that this is Musee's fifth life. Musee confirms it and explains that one of her past lives ended when she fell from a cliff. She continues recounting her other deaths, including being cut to pieces, dying from illness after an assault, and being killed by her former fiancé just before meeting Ragnar. Carlos and Freddy are horrified by the brutal reality. Musee notices Freddy's troubled expression and asks what's wrong. He admits he never knew the full details until now. Musee calmly explains that she was never really trying to hide the truth, especially since she has not died in this life. Victoria expresses sympathy for everything Musee has endured. Musee cheerfully reassures her that she understands if it is difficult to believe. Victoria places a hand over her chest and reveals that her divine gift allows her to detect lies, confirming that Musee's story is completely truthful. Ragnar rests his chin on his hand and concludes that Aliciella truly is an irregularity in this world. He notes that Victoria is a genuine saint, chosen and blessed by God, so her ability to detect lies should be working perfectly. Yet Aliciella remains a complete glitch in the world's order. Victoria looks concerned as she wonders what they should do about a flawed saint who has somehow escaped God's plan. Ragnar points to Victoria and explains that he contacted her because she is the right person to handle the cleanup. His choice of words leaves her puzzled. His eyes narrow with murderous intent as he admits he would love nothing more than to slaughter everyone who targeted Musee. However, those men were merely being controlled by Aliciella, so Ragna is willing to consider their circumstances. Instead, he plans to start by bringing ruin to the people surrounding her. Musee notices his cheerful mood and remarks that he seems to be enjoying himself. Ragna happily agrees, thrilled at the chance to crush everyone who caused her suffering. Ragna points out that Aliciella is abusing the powers of a saint, and the church cannot simply ignore it. Victoria agrees with a serious expression, declaring Aliciella's actions to be blasphemy against God. Ragna then turns to Musee and mentions someone she has yet to meet in this life, asking if she knows who it is. Musee gasps as the realization hits her, wondering who she has yet to encounter. Musee asks if Ragna means Laura Conner, and his knowing smirk confirms it. Freddie and Carlos look puzzled by the unfamiliar name, so Musee explains that Laura is a female student who is always by Aliciella's side. Musee recalls how Laura treated her with condescending cruelty in every previous life. Ragna narrows his eyes behind his glasses, pointing out that Laura has not appeared even once in this timeline. He reveals why, explaining that Victor sold Laura off instead. Freddie clutches his forehead in exasperation at yet another incident involving the Prime Minister's son. Ragna suspects Laura knew a dangerous secret that they were better off not discovering. Victoria and Leona listen closely as Ragna explains that rescuing Laura would let them extract crucial information from her. That information could give them the leverage needed to bring about Victor's complete downfall. Ragna chuckles with excitement, admitting that things are finally starting to get fun. With a sinister smirk and glowing eyes, Ragna declares that their counterattack is officially underway. Musee recalls Laura Conner, who has not appeared at all in this fifth life, hoping to uncover new information. Since Laura is nowhere to be found in this timeline, the group decides to rescue her. Ragna and Carlos head to the brothel where they believe Laura is being held, while Musee stays at the church under the protection of the saint and Leona, where armed guards are nearby. Inside the church parlor, Victoria takes a sip of tea and asks Musee if she is worried. Musee smiles confidently and says she is not worried because Ragna is there. She realizes the brothel is likely the same place Victor tried to sell her to in the past. Our girl figures Ragna simply did not want to take her to such a place. Something suddenly squirms beneath the collar of her dress. Lilna pops his head out and asks if Musee is all right. Musee gently pats the little dragon by her shoulder and assures him that she is completely fine. Lilna is actually a piece of Ragna separated from him to serve as her personal guard. Although he speaks the Dragonian tongue, Musee can understand him perfectly. Musee strokes the little dragon and admits that she hopes his master does not go overboard. Lilna grins and agrees, though he jokingly admits that Ragna holding back is probably impossible. Outside the brothel, a customer finishes his visit and leaves the rundown alley. Carlos watches from the shadows and tells Ragna that the final customer is gone. Carlos turns to Ragna and asks if they should make their move. Ragna suggests waiting a little longer. The staff will be cleaning up soon, leaving them less alert, and Carlos agrees. Carlos says he investigated the traffickers as requested and found the people Victor does business with particularly vile. He adds that numerous rumors claim the prostitutes inside are treated horribly. Ragna yawns in boredom, prompting Carlos to ask why he is even bothering to rescue Laura Conner. Carlos asks if revenge is all he wants. Why not simply kill everyone and be done with it? Ragna admits that killing everyone would be easier and says he initially thought the same way. Carlos is startled and asks what changed his mind. Ragna's eyes narrow with a sinister grin as he points out that these people made Musee suffer and die 4 times, so they do not deserve an easy death. He admits it is nothing more than his own ego, but simply killing them would be meaningless. He wants everyone who hurt Musee to suffer before they die. Carlos shudders and breaks into a cold sweat at the sheer darkness of Ragna's malice. As they infiltrate the hazy hallway, Carlos covers his nose and mouth and notes the strong smell of drugs. Carlos senses the drug in the air and realizes it can severely suppress a person's sense of self. He suspects they may be using it together with an aphrodisiac. Carlos recalls the brothel's layout, explaining that higher floors are reserved for higher-ranking prostitutes with better rooms. Since Laura just arrived, she should still be on the first floor. At a frosted glass door, Carlos senses 13 people inside. Ragna confirms it as he places a glowing hand against the frame. Ragna releases a quiet wave of magic into the room, where several women lie asleep, and tells Carlos not to wake anyone. Carlos notices that all the girls look sickly. Ragna confirms Laura is not among them, when a creaking door suddenly catches their attention. A woman steps inside and starts shouting in shock at the intruders. but Ragna quickly grabs her by the clothes. Ragna removes his glasses and locks eyes with her, commanding her to stay quiet and listen. The woman immediately falls under his enchantment. Carlos deadpans that using his looks to control women is exactly what a creep would do, earning an annoyed grumble from Ragna. Ragna asks the captivated woman about a girl who was deceived and sold to the brothel, describing Laura's cobalt blue hair and pink eyes. The woman recalls hearing about someone named Lorna, or something similar. She reveals that the girl is being held in the discipline room in the basement, prompting Ragna to ask what that means. The woman explains that the discipline room is where those who disobey orders are punished. Carlos heads down the stone stairs uneasily and calls for Ragna to follow. Behind iron bars at the bottom, a man pins a helpless woman to the stone floor beside scattered bottles and a syringe. Carlos and Ragna arrive just in time to see it. The man angrily grabs the struggling woman's arm, but Ragna orders Carlos to move. Carlos rushes in from behind and snaps the man's neck, leaving him lifeless on the floor. Carlos catches the collapsing woman and asks about the scattered vials and syringe. Ragna identifies them as drugs, while Carlos notes how toxic the substance is. The woman breathes heavily in a daze as Carlos realizes she is in serious condition. Ragna raises his glowing hand over her and casts a healing spell to treat her injuries. The woman's pain fades as the healing magic takes effect, allowing her to rest peacefully. Ragna notes that her complexion has improved and tells Carlos to carry her, marking the successful rescue of Laura Conner. Back at the church, Laura lies safely tucked beneath the blankets in a quiet bedroom. Laura slowly opens her eyes and stares at the ceiling in a daze, tears welling up as she realizes her ordeal is finally over. Downstairs, King Freddy, Ragna, Musee, and Carlos wait in the parlor as Laura reflects on finally being free. Ragna calls out to Musee, prompting her to turn and ask what he wants. With his arms crossed, Ragna complains that his little fragment still has not returned while Lilna happily rests in Musee's hands. Musee casually says she has no idea, while Lilna happily wiggles and chirps about how much fun he is having, much to Ragna's annoyance. Ragna angrily orders his separated fragment to return, but Lilna simply grins and refuses. Ragna unleashes a terrifying aura and extends a claw, declaring that he will not let his own fragment hog Musee all to himself. Musee pulls Lilna against her chest and urgently tells Ragna to stop, begging him not to hurt the little dragon. Ragna freezes in shock when he hears the name Lilna, repeating it in disbelief. Ragna slumps forward with a heavy sigh as Musee asks what is wrong, while King Freddy watches from across the table. Ragna explains that although Lilna began as a fragment of himself, Musee giving him a name turned him into a completely separate being. Since Musee is his bride, she has a strong affinity with his power. The moment she named him Lilna, the little dragon gained his own will, personality, and existence. Musee points out that creating a separate being is quite serious, but Ragna says it is fine since Lilna can protect her and contact him whenever trouble arises. King Freddy, meanwhile, despairs over the evil dragon multiplying. Ragna reminds them that Lilna is an evil dragon too and possesses considerable strength. The tiny dragon simply tilts his head in confusion. Ragna gives him a chilling smirk and warns that if Lilna ever disobeys Musee, he will personally train him, sending the little dragon into a panic. The door opens as Saint Victoria enters the parlor with Leona, apologizing for the wait, while Laura timidly follows behind them. Laura freezes when she sees King Freddy sitting in the room, stammering nervously in shock. King Freddy tells her there is no need for a formal greeting in private and acknowledges the ordeal she endured as Lady Laura Conner. Ragna leans back with an amused smirk and interrupts, telling the king he has it completely wrong. Ragna fixes a knowing gaze on the trembling girl and orders her to reveal her real name. Tears stream down her face as she clutches her hands to her chest and finally confesses that her true name is Aliciella Machilus. The entire parlor falls into stunned silence at the shocking revelation. King Freddy jumps to his feet and demands that Ragna explain what this means. Ragna narrows his eyes and reminds them of his earlier warning about that woman possessing a chaotic soul. Ragna reveals that Aliciella, Machilus, and Laura Conner have swapped souls. Ragna explains that the switch was accomplished through forbidden magic. King Freddy and Carlos recoil in disbelief as they grasp the terrifying implications. Carlos points out that only the royal family is entrusted with controlling forbidden magic, suddenly realizing what happened. Ragna confirms his suspicion, explaining that the impostor somehow approached Crown Prince Reed and obtained forbidden magic through him. King Freddy clutches his head in dismay, unable to believe that Crown Prince Reed taught someone forbidden magic. Ragna turns to Aliciella and asks how she ended up living as Laura Conner. Aliciella begins recounting what happened on the day she enrolled at the academy. While entering through the school gates, she encountered a lone female student. She admits she had no idea what was happening when the girl suddenly reached an open hand toward her. In the next moment, Aliciella finds herself staring at her own body with the other girl standing before her. She looks down at her unfamiliar hands in shock before suddenly losing consciousness. When Aliciella wakes up, she has already been sold to the brothel, where she is drugged and abused during her captivity. Ragnar rests his chin on his hand and raises a finger, preparing to lay out what happened. He explains that forbidden magic swapped their souls, after which the impostor knocked Aliciella out with seduction and brainwashing magic before selling her to the brothel with Victor's help. Victoria comforts the weeping Aliciella before remarking that Ragnar sounds remarkably certain about his assumptions. Ragnar explains that while he cannot see the future, his powers as an evil dragon allow him to make highly accurate deductions about the past within a limited scope. Carlos sweats awkwardly at how absurdly powerful Ragnar's ability is, while Victoria comforts Aliciella and Musee watches in silence. Musee looks at Aliciella and realizes that she could easily have suffered the same tragic fate as Musee did in her previous lives. Musee reflects that under normal circumstances, such a tragedy would have shaken her deeply, but her heart has grown frighteningly cold. Ragnar calls Musee's name as he senses her emotions shift. She keeps a gentle smile while silently admitting that she is broken. Ragnar turns to Aliciella and bluntly tells her that the chances of returning to her original body are extremely low. Victoria gasps in shock and scolds Ragnar for being so blunt. Ragnar calmly closes his eyes and says she would have learned the truth sooner or later. He asks Victoria to take Aliciella under her wing and provide her with the church's support. Ragnar asks King Freddy if he plans to arrest Victor. The king confirms that human trafficking is illegal, even for the prime minister's son, prompting Ragnar to ask him to leave Victor to him. With a sinister smirk, Ragnar says he wants Victor to experience hell before he is arrested. King Freddy shudders before reluctantly agreeing, leaving Ragnar satisfied. With the agreement settled, Ragnar's revenge against Victor officially begins. Inside his dark estate at night, Victor sits at his study desk, trying to figure out how to deal with the troublesome Lady Musee so he can bring Aliciella and the evil dragon together. Victor remembers how Aliciella healed the injuries he suffered when the evil dragon broke his bones, strengthening his resolve to continue secretly working for her sake. A sinister smirk crosses Victor's face as he confidently believes he will soon fulfill Aliciella's greatest desire, completely unaware of the dark figure behind him. Victor turns in terror and demands to know who entered the room, only for Ragnar to appear before him and cast a sleeping spell over his head. The spell takes effect instantly, causing Victor to lose consciousness and collapse onto the floor. A shoe steps beside a dead mouse lying on the dusty floor of the castle dungeon. Musee notices the dead mouse and complains about how filthy the dungeon is, while Ragnar calmly agrees with her. The same night Ragnar rescued the real Aliciella, he also abducted Victor and locked him inside the castle dungeons. Victor sits tied up inside a barred cell, awaiting the interrogation Ragnar has planned for him. Musee recalls that her idea of a dungeon comes from the place where the evil dragon's church imprisoned her during her fourth life. She remembers that the place was completely devoid of light, as if the entire world had been swallowed by darkness. Ragnar notices her expression and asks if she is all right. Musee gives him a bright smile and says she is fine, adding that this is just a typical dungeon. Ragnar explains that the room they were previously trapped in was merely a space sealed by magic, while these cells are actual dungeon cells. Musee awkwardly wonders if he is really explaining what a dungeon cell is to her, and he admits that he probably is. A sudden realization crosses Musee's mind. She calls Ragnar's name and asks if he is desperately holding back his excitement right now. Ragnar gives her a sharp look and silently wonders how she figured that out. He admits that he is about to do some truly horrible things, and as the evil dragon, he cannot deny that he enjoys it. Ragnar lowers his voice and worries that Musee might eventually hate him for what he is about to do. Musee places a hand over her chest and reminds him that he has not given her any reason to hate him yet. Ragnar reaches toward her and warns that once she sees his true nature as the evil dragon, she may change her mind. Musee rests a hand against her chin and quietly considers his words. She raises a hand and tells Ragnar that she understands why he fears her hatred, but she will decide for herself after seeing what he does, leaving him stunned. Ragnar asks if she is supposed to promise unconditional love in a situation like this, but Musee firmly refuses, wondering what kind of romance novels he has been reading. Musee remembers her younger self, realizing that the girl blinded by love back then would have made such a promise without hesitation. Unlike what happened with Alfred, she refuses to die alone with a broken heart again. Musee looks ahead with determination and decides that if she is destined to die anyway, she wants to spend her final moments with the person she loves in this fifth life. Musee tells Ragna to stop hesitating and simply show her his true nature already, prompting an amused smirk from him. Ragna agrees, gently cupping Musee's face as he happily admits how glad he is that she is his bride. A flash of magic unlocks the iron lock, and Ragna pushes open the creaking wooden door to reveal Victor bound and twitching on the stone floor. Victor glares up at them in rage, his face covered in sweat as he furiously demands to know what they want. Ragna greets him by his full name, Victor Wachtal, then taunts him by asking how it feels to be the one who was captured. Victor looks up nervously and demands to know what they plan to do with him. Ragna bursts into laughter and reminds him that he was the one who sold Laura Koner to a brothel. Ragna grabs Victor by the hair and yanks his head back, his eyes glowing with malice as he demands to know what the hidden saint, Aliciella Machilas, is planning. Victor gives a defiant smirk and refuses to reveal anything. Ragna calmly accepts his refusal and decides they will have to do things differently. He places a hand over Victor's face and warns that he has no reason to hold back, sending Victor into a terrified shudder. A dark aura surrounds Ragna as he smiles, creating an illusion of fake Aliciella before Victor's eyes. Victor's eyes widen in disbelief as he recognizes her, quietly whispering Aliciella's name, while the illusion gently touches his face. Through the illusion, Ragna orders Victor to reveal his goal and explain what they are trying to accomplish. Under the spell, Victor struggles to speak before admitting that their goal is to make the entire world love her. Fake Aliciella smiles playfully and asks what that love is supposed to mean. Victor explains in a dazed voice that because Aliciella is a saint, the entire world, even the evil dragon, must love her. Ragna freezes in disbelief beside Musee, realizing that this absurd plan is the grand scheme Victor came up with. The mention of a scenario reminds Musee that Laura used the exact same word before. Through the illusion, Ragna asks Victor if Laura possesses the power of precognition, but Victor insists that it is not precognition. Ragna continues the interrogation and asks why they specifically targeted Musee Schnorr. Victor replies in a daze that Laura said Musee would interfere with their plan to make the evil dragon love her. He adds that Musee Schnorr is destined to die anyway, so what happens to her is irrelevant. Musee quietly processes the absurdity of it all, realizing that their cruelty toward her was never personal. They were simply acting on a vague claim about her fate. Ragna orders Victor to explain further, but he admits that he knows nothing else and was only trying to get rid of Musee for Laura's sake. Ragna rubs the back of his neck in disappointment, realizing Victor is useless because he was brainwashed into blindly following orders without knowing the details. Musee calmly asks if that means Victor is completely useless to them. Ragna agrees that Victor is useless, noting that the foolish woman's brainwashing still has a firm grip on him. Ragna snaps his fingers and decides they will have to break Victor down to the deepest part of his heart, making him gasp in shock. Victor snaps back to his senses and demands to know what Ragna did to him. Ragna casually explains that he only used a spell to extract the information he needed. Victor grits his teeth and curses that this happened just when he was about to fulfill Aliciella's wish. Ragna's ear twitches as he catches those words. A menacing aura erupts around Ragna as he laughs coldly and asks if Victor was actually close to getting rid of Musee. Dark energy pours from Ragna as his eyes glow fiercely. He declares that Victor has earned his wrath and asks if he is ready to face the consequences, leaving Victor horrified as countless monstrous eyes appear around him. Victor drops to his knees in the pitch-black void, bound in chains as hundreds of unsettling eyes watch him from the darkness. The suffocating darkness drives Victor into a panic as he screams for someone to tell him where he is and desperately begs to be let out. A mysterious voice wonders if that girl begged for help the same way before Victor can even finish his own cry for help. A horned figure with wings and a tail emerges from the darkness. Victor trembles and asks if he is a demon, prompting Ace to confirm with a charming smirk that he is an incubus. Ace looks down at Victor and says men who sell innocent girls to brothels make him sick, admitting that he despises people like him. He explains that the evil dragon gave him one simple order: make Victor suffer the same way he made those girls suffer. Ace adds that the other demons will help carry out the punishment as dark tentacles lash toward Victor, leaving him frozen in terror. Dark tentacles wrap around Victor as he breaks down in tears, while Ace cheerfully orders the demons to have fun with their human victim. Horrific screams and the sound of snapping bones fill the dungeon as black tendrils engulf Victor, while Musee calmly watches from her seat beside Ragna and Ace. Victor's screams continue as the tendrils crush his bones, while Ragna laughs with sinister delight and declares that he deserves it. Ace leans out from the shadows with a playful smile and asks Musee if she is holding up all right. Ace places a hand over his chest and introduces himself, explaining that this is their first meeting and that he is an incubus serving the evil dragon. Ace chuckles that watching a man endure this kind of torture is hardly an ordinary sight for a woman, while Musee lightly warns the demons not to go too far. Ace politely greets Musee Schnorr, who returns the greeting before nervously asking what Ragna is doing in the background. Ace cheerfully explains that Ragna is using Victor's body to produce countless demons, whose offspring consume his organs before bursting through his stomach. The process is excruciating, but Ragna repeatedly heals Victor with magic so the demons can emerge and the cycle can begin again. Ragna flashes a cheerful peace sign with an innocent smile, completely covered in the gruesome aftermath. Musee turns to Ace and asks if Ragna is always like this. Ace laughs and quickly denies it. Ace explains that compared to his usual self, Ragna is actually being quite tame today. He recalls how Ragna once turned the world into a fiery hell during his ancient war with God, making today's torture look like child's play. Ace recalls that humans were far stronger in the distant past, leading to countless demons being slaughtered. He explains that the one who saved the surviving demons from that tragedy was none other than the evil dragon himself. Ace remembers kneeling before the evil dragon as Ragna gathered the demons under his command and granted them his divine protection. That protection came at a cost, as Ragna had to give up portions of his own power, growing weaker each time he protected another demon. Ace adds that granting them protection also made Ragna an even greater target for human hunters. Ace turns to Musee and admits that his request may be presumptuous, but he sincerely begs for her help. He asks Musee to ease their master's worries, the worries of the evil dragon. A gentle smile crosses Musee's face as she remembers Ragna worrying that she might hate him after seeing his true nature. Musee confidently declares that, as the evil dragon's bride and future wife, she will wipe away all of her husband's worries. Ace places a hand over his chest and softly thanks Musee for her kind words. He remarks that Musee has nerves of steel to remain unfazed by the gruesome scene and Victor's agonized screams. Musee smiles and says she has probably grown used to it after spending so much time around Ragna, prompting Ace to nod in understanding. Ace cheerfully points out that despite being human, Musee carries the evil dragon's glowing power within her, leaving her confused. Victor lies motionless on the floor with hollow eyes as Ragna steps back and apologizes for keeping them waiting. Ragna explains that he used magic to keep Victor from passing out during the ordeal. Ace covers the fallen Victor with a sheet and explains that the spell kept him conscious despite the unbearable pain. Ragna admits he may have broken him a little too badly. Musee points out that Ragna certainly did not hold back, but he rests a hand on her shoulder and asks if she really thinks so, insisting that he thought he was being merciful. Ragna meets Musee's eyes with a gentle but anxious expression and quietly asks if she has become afraid of him. Musee calmly tells Ragna that he is simply overthinking things. With a bright, gentle smile, she reassures him that she still does not hate him. Ragna's eyes soften as a warm, relieved smile spreads across his face. Musee reaches for his hand and praises him for his hard work, before suggesting they go have some tea together. Victor Wachtall hangs from the chains, completely broken and covered in black stains, as his punishment finally comes to an end. King Freddy addresses Victor from his throne, explaining that he has spared him from execution because he was acting under brainwashing. Heavy iron chains bind Victor as the king sentences him to exile on the prison island. Victor accepts his punishment in a daze, staying sane only through Ragna's magic as the memories of his torture continue to haunt him. Inside the church, Saint Victoria Raymond, Aliciella, in Laura's body, Musee, and Ragna watch as the chained Victor falls to his knees and bows his head. Victor presses his face to the ground and tearfully apologizes to Musee and Laura for the horrific suffering he caused them. Tears stream down Aliciella's face as she screams at Victor, blaming him for everything she endured. Saint Victoria gently holds her while Musee watches in silence. Musee gives Victor a cold smile and says she doesn't care enough about him to decide whether to forgive him, then tells him to hurry up and go to prison or die. Victor trembles at her chilling response before offering one final, tearful apology. In the king's relaxation room, Ragna laughs cheerfully and announces that it's time to deal with the next target while Musee, King Freddy, and Carlos listen. King Freddy sighs and clutches his head at Ragna's loud enthusiasm, while Musee stares ahead in stunned silence. Ragna reveals their next target, knight candidate Jean Bista. Musee recalls being run through by a sword and realizes Ragna means the very same knight. Ragna explains that Jean has a natural resistance to brainwashing, just like Carlos, forcing the fake saint to place an even stronger spell on him. Jean is now avoiding Musee to keep his brainwashing from being triggered, leaving her and King Freddy deeply concerned. King Freddy asks how Ragna knows so much about Jean's situation, immediately catching his attention. Ragna laughs and says it was easy to figure out because he has been preparing to deal with Jean for quite some time. King Freddy and Musee stare in confusion as Ragna smirks and snaps his fingers, filling the room with dark smoke. A winged demon emerges with a cheerful wink and introduces herself as Ada, Ace's older twin sister. King Freddy recoils in shock at the sight of the succubus as Ragna casually explains that Ada has been giving Jean nightmares every night. Jean tosses and turns in his bed as Ragna explains that once Ada crushes his motivation one last time, he will make his final move when Jean arrives at school tomorrow. Ragna grins with slitted eyes, noting that although a succubus's powers resemble brainwashing, the effect on Jean has been even better than expected. Ada puffs out her cheeks and playfully demands a reward for her hard work. Ragna turns to Musee and cheerfully asks how she wants to deal with Jean, catching her completely off guard. Ragna points out that simply killing Jean holds no value for Musee, so he asks what punishment she would prefer instead. With a manic grin, Ragna suggests cutting off both of Jean's arms so he can never become a knight. King Freddy breaks into a cold sweat as Ragna wonders whether he should cut off Jean's legs too or leave him barely alive. Musee cups her chin and asks Ragna to break Jean's heart through ordinary means instead, so he will no longer be vulnerable to brainwashing. Ragna falls silent for a moment before reluctantly agreeing to Musee's request. Musee places a hand over her chest and apologizes for being selfish about the situation. She explains with a gentle but serious gaze that mental wounds can be far more painful than physical ones, leaving Ragna stunned. A warm blush spreads across Ragna's face as he gazes at her with a captivated smile. Ragna laughs with delight and pulls Musee into a tight hug, praising her for coming up with such a vicious idea. Musee gasps and asks if her suggestion was really that vicious, but Ragna insists it is the most interesting option. Ragna leans close and whispers that he is happy to see her thoughts becoming tainted by his own dark preferences. Ada suddenly interrupts their moment in annoyance, making Musee gasp as Ragna glares at her. Ada complains that their innocent, sickly sweet display is making a succubus like her want to throw up sugar, while King Freddy awkwardly clears his throat. Ragna explains the plan: capture Jean, take him to the church to prevent further brainwashing, and hand him over to the king. Ragna asks if anyone objects, and King Freddy firmly agrees, promising to handle the necessary preparations. Ragna points out that they first need to get Jean to school, leaving Musee surprised that he has stopped attending classes. The constant nightmares have been crushing Jean's spirit and destroying his health through severe sleep deprivation. Ragna turns to Ada and orders her to make sure Jean goes to school tomorrow. Ada gives a cheerful wink and crisp salute, assuring her boss that she will handle it. Late that night, Jean tosses and turns in bed before another nightmare takes hold. In the dream, Jean stands over the bloody corpses of his victims, laughing hysterically with hollow eyes and a sword in hand. Jean realizes in despair that he is reliving the same nightmare, convinced that he killed all his friends and family with his own blade. The nightmare shows Jean plunging his sword straight through Musee's chest as blood splatters between them. Covered in blood, Musee confronts the trembling knight candidate, reminding him that despite wanting to protect people as a knight, he has killed her countless times. Jean collapses to his hands and knees with a groan as Ada approaches in high heels and smugly asks if her nightmares have been rough. Ada crouches down, cups Jean's face, and praises him for letting his heart be completely crushed. With a seductive smile, Ada plants a command in Jean's mind, ordering him to go to school tomorrow. Under the weight of the command, Jean slowly opens his eyes as morning arrives. Compelled to obey, Jean mutters that he has to go. Meanwhile, Ragna and Musee wait outside the night department classroom, with Lilna perched on her shoulder and happily promising to protect her big sister. Ragna throws both classroom doors open with a loud slam as Musee quietly follows behind him. The classroom erupts in surprise as the students turn toward them, while an exhausted Jean looks up to find Ragna approaching his desk. Ragna bends toward Jean with a sinister grin and quietly tells him that his punishment is about to begin. One of the students grabs Ragna by the shoulder and demands an explanation, pointing out that Jean is obviously in no condition to be bothered. Ragna turns toward him with a cold stare, instantly frightening the student into silence. Musee enters the room and approaches Jean with a cheerful smile, greeting him warmly. Jean's brainwashing immediately activates at the sight of her, driving him into a violent rage as he charges forward and screams that she has no right to address him by name. His classmates barely manage to restrain him. Breathing hard, Jean struggles against their grip while the others stare in confusion, unable to understand his sudden aggression toward a woman. Jean insists that Musee is Aliciella's enemy, so he sees no reason to treat her like a woman. Musee remains calm as Ragna chuckles and suggests that Jean settle the matter with a duel, reminding him that he is part of the Knights Department. Ragna's eyes glow as he challenges Jean to fight, warning that after raising a sword against his bride, Jean must now answer for it. Jean angrily snaps that he is more than willing to fight. On the academy training grounds, Ragna and Jean face each other with swords drawn as a crowd of students gathers to watch. Jean turns to Ragna and Musee and demands to know what he will receive if he wins. Musee calmly asks what he wants as his victory condition. Jean's face darkens with bloodlust as he demands Musee's death. The students erupt into uneasy whispers at Jean's brutal demand. Musee cheerfully accepts, promising that if Jean defeats Ragna, she will let him kill her. Jean stares at her in disbelief, stunned by how easily she accepted the deadly condition. Ragna objects to Musee putting her life on the line, but she gently reassures him that it is fine because he will surely win. Ragna smirks and quietly vows to live up to the faith Musee has placed in him. Jean takes his stance with both hands gripping his training sword, his eyes fixed on Ragna. Ragna smiles behind his glasses and asks Jean if he minds letting him make the first move. Jean tightens his grip and charges forward, accepting Ragna's offer with a fierce shout. In an instant, Jean's left arm is severed and sent flying through the air, leaving him frozen in disbelief. Jean stares in horror as the reality of the strike finally sinks in. He collapses to his knees and screams in agony while Ragna stands over him without a trace of concern. Ragna gives a sinister smirk and calls it the first strike as Jean trembles and clutches his sword, glowing magic already healing his wound. Jean looks down in confusion and finds his arm completely intact, despite clearly remembering it being cut off. Ragna cheerfully readies his sword and announces the second round, asking Jean if he is ready to continue. Another swift slash sends Jean screaming in agony, leaving the watching students confused as they see no visible injury. Jean clutches his chest and sweats heavily, realizing the pain is real as his severed flesh rapidly regenerates. Ragna stands calmly beside the blood-stained ground as Jean realizes the same horrific cycle is repeating itself. The torment continues without end, trapping Jean in an endless cycle of agony and regeneration. Ragna grips his blade and grins at the terrified Jean, declaring that the real punishment has only just begun. Ragna repeatedly slashes Jean, severing his limb and leaving the knight candidate screaming in agony. The evil dragon grins with terrifying delight as he completely dominates the one-sided clash. Jean wheezes in pain beside Ragna while Musee covers her mouth and lets out a quiet, bored yawn. Ada pulls out a chair and warmly invites Musee to sit, while Ace pours her a fresh cup of tea with a pleasant smile. Musee thanks Ace for the tea, but Ada pouts and playfully demands his attention after he says it was no trouble. Musee watches Jean get completely overwhelmed as his severed wounds regenerate after every strike, only for Ragna to attack him again without mercy. The surrounding students watch the duel in confusion, unable to understand what is really happening. A furious voice suddenly demands to know what is going on as Ragna calmly points his sword at the trembling Jean. The fake Aliciella rushes into the training grounds with a panicked expression, followed by Crown Prince Reed, Rayfan, and Alfred. Musee notices their arrival and quietly corrects herself, referring to the newcomer as Lady Aliciella instead of Laura. The fake Aliciella stares in shock before frantically calling out to Lord Ragna, demanding to know what he is doing. Ragna calmly looks down through his glasses before swiftly swinging his sword. She desperately begs him to stop the torment. Covered in blood, Ragna turns toward the fake Aliciella with a chilling smirk and asks why she cares, pointing out that this has nothing to do with her. The fake Aliciella turns her fury toward Musee, accusing her of ordering Ragna to do this. She angrily demands to know why Musee would tell Ragna to hurt Jean, while our girl stares back in calm bewilderment. Musee calmly explains that she had nothing to do with it and that Ragna is acting entirely on his own. The fake Aliciella calls Musee a liar, furious that she always gets in her way no matter what route she takes. Tears of anger fill her eyes as she complains that Musee ruined everything just when she thought she was finally succeeding on the Ragna route, accusing her of enjoying every chance to interfere. Musee catches on to the strange phrase and wonders what a Ragna route could possibly mean. Crown Prince Reed and Alfred step forward with blank, entranced expressions, their cold gazes fixed on Musee. Ada and Ace glare toward the entrance as the fake Aliciella points at Musee and orders Reed and Alfred to kill her and put the story back on track. A sudden kick sends both Reed and Alfred flying backward, crashing down with painful groans. Musee calmly watches as Reed and Alfred collapse onto the exhausted Jean. At the entrance, the fake Aliciella stares in terror as Ragna turns toward her. A suffocating aura erupts around Ragna as his eyes widen with murderous intent. He asks if she was really trying to kill Musee. Sharp icicles spread across the ground beneath Ragna, forcing the terrified students to flee from the freezing aura. Ada panics as Ragna's magic threatens to freeze the entire world, while Ace nervously asks if things are getting serious. Ragna glares coldly through his glasses and mutters his disgust toward the lowly human before him. Ragna drags his bloodied sword along the floor and sighs, bitterly thinking what a nuisance this whole ordeal is. The fake Aliciella cowers against the wall as Ragna looms over her, realizing that killing her now would bring the story to an immediate end. Ragna raises his blood-stained sword behind his neck, glaring down at the trembling fake Aliciella. Musee places a hand against her chest and tells Ragna to wait, insisting that he cannot kill her. Ragna pauses and looks back at Musee in confusion. The fake Aliciella trembles as Ragna points out that she was just trying to kill Musee. Our girl agrees, but remains firm. Musee calmly explains that killing her so easily would ruin Ragna's fun. Ragna's eyes light up as he realizes Musee is absolutely right, a faint blush appearing on his cheeks. Ragna rests his sword on his shoulder and cheerfully agrees to spare the fake Aliciella for Musee's sake, but his smile quickly turns into a chilling warning. Ragna points directly at her and orders the trembling girl to listen carefully. Ragna kneels before her and warns that she will never escape him. He intends to expose her true identity and every crime she has committed. Ragna reveals her true name, Laura Connor, with a sinister smirk as a dark curse wraps around her throat, leaving her frozen in shock. Ragna rises with a satisfied smile, confirming that the curse worked perfectly before deciding that this is enough for today. Ragna examines the curse mark around her neck and declares that she can no longer escape after he successfully engraved his curse into her. A sinister grin spreads across Ragna's face as he warns Laura to prepare herself. Ragna laughs with sinister amusement, clearly looking forward to what comes next as Musee sits calmly nearby. Musee calmly sips her tea and lets out a relaxed sigh. Our girl smiles brightly and praises the tea for its pleasant taste. Jean Bista kneels in defeat, marking the end of Musee's revenge against him. At the church, Jean prostrates himself before Musee and admits that being brainwashed does not excuse his actions. He accepts the lifelong shame of raising his sword against a noblewoman and begs for a chance to atone. Musee calmly faces the kneeling knight candidate while Ragna watches from behind her. Jean keeps his head against the floor as Musee points out that an apology cannot erase what he did. Musee smiles with her eyes closed and asks if he really expects her to simply forgive him. Her smile turns cold as she points out that wanting to make amends may simply be Jean's way of easing his own guilt. Musee turns to Ragna and asks what they should do with Jean. Ragna cheerfully suggests cutting off Jean's arms and legs before killing him so he can never become a knight. Lilna even offers to eat him head first, leaving Jean paralyzed with terror until Ragna tells the little dragon to stop. Musee decides that leaving the knight candidate to His Majesty is the best option. King Freddy suddenly sneezes while working alone at his paperwork-covered desk in the palace. Jean Bista receives his punishment and is sentenced to eternal servitude to the church. Ragna laughs cheerfully from the couch and announces that it is time to move on to their next target. King Freddy nervously asks who their next target is. With a sinister smirk, Ragna names Crown Prince Reed, leaving King Freddy frozen in shock. King Freddy protests in disbelief as Ragna reveals that the prince was the one who had Musee killed in her first life. Ragna explains that Reed used Carlos by feeding him false information, as the flashback shows the prince being served tea by him. Carlos reports that Musee will soon leave the royal capital via the Gale Highway, immediately catching Reed's attention. Reed smirks as he recalls an isolated cliffside path along the Gale Highway with barely any foot traffic. Reed smiles as he raises his teacup, casually suggesting that a little accident on that isolated path would be no problem. He suggests that Musee's carriage could overturn and send her over the cliff, asking Carlos if he understands as Carlos grips the teapot handle tightly. Ragna explains that Reed was the mastermind behind the plan, while Carlos was merely used to carry it out. Ragna turns to King Freddy and asks if he has anything to say about the matter. King Freddy firmly declines, stating that Reed ordered someone to take a life and that he will leave his judgment to Ragna. Ragna chuckles, admitting he expected the king to be more sentimental and at least ask him to spare his son. King Freddy clenches his fists and declares that Reed committed a crime, refusing to let their family relationship cloud his judgment. Ragna smirks and praises King Freddy for reaching the correct conclusion despite his position as Reed's father. Ragna snaps his fingers and announces that it is time for their next matter. Carlos drops down from above and lands quietly as Ragna apologizes for keeping him waiting. Carlos simply replies that it is no problem. Ragna reveals that Carlos has been monitoring the Crown Prince's movements, leaving King Freddy shocked at how long he had been hiding there. Carlos reports that Reed plans to meet them 3 days from now at the Tegano ruins, just outside the royal capital. Musee looks up in confusion and asks who Carlos means by them. Ragna smirks and explains that he means the people who restrained Musee in her fourth life. Musee freezes as Ragna reveals that those mysterious figures are the Church of the Evil Dragon. Ragna notices her unease and gently reassures her that everything will be fine because he has taken all the necessary precautions. Musee remains worried, but Ragna smiles confidently and promises that he will not get captured so easily this time. Musee gives him a soft, trusting smile, reassured by his confidence. Ragna raises 3 fingers and declares that they will carry out their plan in 3 days. With a sinister smirk, Ragna declares that they will finally catch that idiot prince. Late at night, Rayfan stands by the window when Ragna suddenly emerges from the shadows and cheerfully greets him. Ragna lounges in an armchair beside the letter from King Freddy, noting that Rayfan has been waiting ever since receiving it. He then announces that his time has finally come. Ragna gives the young noble a sharp, playful look and wonders if he can handle his assigned role. Rayfan, dressed in his royal uniform, meets Ragna's gaze with a serious expression. Rayfan confidently promises to fulfill his duty and do whatever is necessary. The scene shifts to Musee's residence, quietly nestled beneath the night sky. Ragna climbs through the window and announces his return as Musee asks where he went. With a subtle smirk, he explains that he met the second prince to prepare for their next operation. Ragna watches in confusion as Lilna hops and spins around the room, while Musee explains that he is exercising to burn off excess fat. Lilna catches his breath and explains that his big sister warned him he would turn into a pig if he stopped exercising. Ragna stares in disbelief, imagining the little evil dragon with a pig snout. He bursts into laughter and asks if Lilna really started exercising because of that, leaving the little dragon confused. His expression suddenly turns serious as he orders Lilna to leave the room for a while, catching him completely off guard. Lilna cheerfully agrees before vanishing into thin air, leaving Musee utterly bewildered. Ragna gently touches Musee's hair and calls her name, prompting her to look up at him with wide eyes. He scoops Musee into his arms, making her gasp in surprise as he holds her close with a gentle smile. Ragna carries her to the bed and sits down, keeping Musee securely in his arms. Ragna casually suggests that they make out for a while. Musee is surprised by his sudden request, but he explains that being connected to that woman has left him mentally exhausted. Deep down, he knows he started this entire revenge scheme on a whim. Musee quietly thinks how peaceful things would be if that carefree, self-proclaimed, fake saint would stop obsessing over Ragna and her scenario. Ragna leans closer with a knowing smile and teases her for thinking the woman was carefree just moments ago. He cheerfully explains that he can usually tell what Musee is thinking because she is his bride, though he cannot read everything. Musee quietly agrees, and he points out that she can read his thoughts at times too. Ragna gazes at her with glowing eyes and quietly asks if she dislikes it. Musee gazes at Ragna in thoughtful silence as his words linger in her mind. A radiant smile spreads across her face as she gently touches his cheek, assuring him that she does not care if he looks into her heart or if her feelings become chaotic, as long as she can stay by his side. A dark aura swirls around Ragna as his glowing eyes widen with sinister delight. He gently touches Musee's trembling cheek and asks her to heal him. Ragna leans closer and gently places a hand on Musee's back as her breath catches and she quietly agrees. Later, Musee sleeps peacefully in bed beneath the starry sky, while Ragna sits beside her and apologizes for frightening her earlier. Ragna reflects that despite being the evil dragon's bride, Musee is still human and naturally fears the darkness within him, yet she never considers running away. As Musee sleeps peacefully, Ragna realizes that she has become dependent on him. He recalls her saying that all she needs is to be with him, recognizing how completely she has accepted him. Ragna concludes that because he was the only person there for her in that hopeless situation, she has mistaken her dependence and sense of security for love. Ragna breaks into a delighted smile and quietly laughs, declaring that this situation could not be better. He decides that it does not matter, because even something fake can eventually become real. Ragna gently rests a hand on Musee's face as she sleeps, wondering why this broken form of love feels so wonderful to him. He silently acknowledges that Musee is far more broken than she even realizes. Ragna leans over her and brings her hair to his lips, quietly admitting that he cannot help but love that part of her. The scene shifts to the Church of the Evil Dragon beneath the bright daytime sky. Inside, Leona serves Musee a fresh cup of tea, earning a warm smile and thanks from our girl. That night, Reed will contact the Church of the Evil Dragon while the women stay behind, giving Ragna and Carlos a chance to capture everyone at once. The Church of the Evil Dragon is actually a criminal organization of fanatical believers who seek to destroy the world by harnessing the evil dragon's immense power. Victoria looks at Musee with concern and asks if she is worried about the operation. Musee lowers her gaze and explains that in her fourth life, she and Ragna were both captured by the same church. Their past capture proves that the cult has a way to restrain the evil dragon, leaving everyone stunned. Victoria touches her face with a troubled expression and agrees that the situation is deeply concerning. Musee clenches her fists as she imagines what would happen if Ragna were captured again, like he was in her fourth life. A fierce aura erupts around her as she declares that she could never forgive the Church of the Evil Dragon. Victoria recoils in shock at Musee's sudden outburst. Lilna frantically flies up and urges his big sister to calm down, snapping Musee back to her senses. Musee gasps as dark smoke swirls around the couch before suddenly vanishing without a trace. Victoria tells Leona to check whether the rest of the church was affected by the sudden burst of power, and Leona nervously obeys. Victoria firmly declares in her name that everything witnessed here must remain strictly secret. Leona bows and acknowledges the order before leaving and closing the door behind her. Victoria calls out to Musee, drawing her attention. Musee freezes as Victoria bluntly asks whether she has noticed herself gradually becoming something non-human. Musee stares ahead in stunned contemplation as the scene shifts to the crumbling Tegano ruins. Ragna stands among the ruins with a flushed smile as a soft glow swirls around him. Carlos looks up from behind the rocks and asks what is wrong. Ragna turns to him and says he can feel his cute Musee breaking more and more. Ragna laughs joyfully and admits that he cannot wait to finish everything so he can see Musee again. Ragna crosses his arms and slyly asks Carlos if he is really comfortable with this plan. He points out that despite his crimes, Crown Prince Reed is still Carlos's master. Ragna asks again if Carlos is truly prepared to capture him. Carlos firmly confirms that he is. Reed not only leaked forbidden techniques to outsiders, but also contacted an organization capable of shaking the entire country. Carlos admits that his failure to stop Reed came from his blind obedience. He accepts responsibility for that sin and is willing to lay down his life to make amends. Carlos lowers his gaze as Musee comes to mind, admitting that he does not know if even his life would be enough to atone for what happened to her. Ragna's expression darkens as he grumpily complains that Carlos should not even feel the need to atone to Musee. Ragna turns away in a sour mood, leaving Carlos confused by his sudden change in attitude. He turns back and bluntly points out that beneath all those excuses, Carlos came here because he wanted to stop the Crown Prince himself. Ragna coldly warns Carlos never to use Musee to justify his own actions, leaving him stunned. Carlos apologizes and lightly smacks his own face, admitting that he never meant to use Ragna's beloved bride that way. A menacing shadow crosses Ragna's face as he warns Carlos that he will kill him if he thinks about Musee again, leaving Carlos nervously smiling. A horse-drawn carriage arrives along the narrow cliffside path beneath the starry sky. Carlos calls the carriage flashy and gaudy, while Ragna remarks that whoever is inside must be a simpleton. Ragna snaps his fingers and summons a swirling shadow, ordering an invisible demon to appear as a mysterious silhouette takes shape. The glowing silhouette excitedly greets his master, thrilled that he has finally been summoned again after more than 100 years. Ragna cuts him off and orders him to eavesdrop on the men ahead while he links their 5 senses together. The demon salutes and quickly heads off. Carlos doubts whether the carefree demon will be useful, but Ragna casually explains that he is one of the weakest demons. Ragna explains that the demon can erase his presence and demonic energy completely, making him undetectable even to enemies on high alert. Carlos is impressed by the demon's abilities and thinks he would make an excellent spy, while Ragna notices that the other guests have finally arrived. Reed, cloaked in a white mantle, stands before the dark-hooded cultists in the ruins. One of the cultists places a hand over his chest and warmly welcomes Reed on behalf of the Church of the Evil Dragon. The cultist remarks that he never imagined the church would meet directly with royalty who consider them heretics. Reed agrees that such a secret meeting would have been unthinkable to him in the past. The cultist gets straight to the point and asks why the Crown Prince has come tonight. Reed smiles beneath his hood and says that everything he does is for the sake of the hidden saint. The cultist looks at him in shock, questioning Reed's mention of a hidden saint. Reed smirks as he reveals that Victoria is not the country's only saint and that another one exists in secret. He explains that this hidden saint wants to entrust the church with an important task. The cultist eagerly asks if she will give them a way to meet the evil dragon. Reed casually says that it might be possible, though he does not know the full details since he is only carrying out her request. Reed hands over a rolled parchment and explains that the hidden saint told him to deliver this technique. The cult leader unrolls the parchment and gasps in shock upon seeing its contents. Tears stream down his face as he realizes it contains the forbidden technique needed to summon the evil dragon. The cult leader raises his fist and excitedly announces that the hidden saint has given them a technique to summon the evil dragon, sending the followers into a frenzy. He continues reading and reveals that the parchment also claims Musee Schnorr, the evil dragon's bride, has placed a curse on him. The cultists erupt in outrage, accusing Musee of cursing the evil dragon so he could never leave her side. They praise the hidden saint and proclaim that she wants to save the evil dragon, insisting that she would make a far better bride. The leader eagerly agrees, declaring that the saint will receive their complete devotion before suddenly falling silent. The cultists gasp as Ragna silently appears among the ruins, his presence instantly overwhelming the gathering. Reed and the cultists tremble in terror as Ragna steps forward and asks who gave them permission to insult his bride. A suffocating dark aura surges around him as he admits that he planned to hold back, but their mockery changed his mind. Ragna glares with terrifying eyes and says he would have spared them if they had not sullied Musee's name. The cultists recoil in panic as Ragna calmly advances toward them. A sinister smirk spreads across his face as he raises his hand, remembering just how bad he is at holding back. Ragna fixes them with a chilling glare and asks how they would like to experience hell inside their own minds. Two colossal glowing eyes open in the dark sky with a deafening roar, paralyzing the cultists and Reed with terror. The cultists clutch their heads and scream in agony as Ragna watches with a sinister smile. Reed gasps for breath while clutching his throbbing head, struggling under Ragna's gaze. Reed groans as a voice calls his name, while shattered memories of the fake saint swirl chaotically through his mind. Ragna looks down in silence as the scene grows tense. His eyes narrow as he coldly asks if they are still thinking about that woman. Ragna calls for Ada and Ace, and the twin demons appear with cheerful obedience. Ada and Ace grin wickedly at the trembling Reed as Ragna points toward him and orders them to show him hell. Some time has passed since Ragna came to stay at Musee's residence. The scene shifts to the busy Schnorr household kitchen, where the staff go about their duties. Musee peeks through the doorway and politely announces herself as the chef works in the kitchen. The household chef, Jeffrey, turns with a warm smile and greets his young lady. Jeffrey remarks that it has been a while since they last spoke, and Musee politely asks if she is bothering him. Jeffrey assures her that it is no trouble and happily welcomes her visit, leaving Musee with a gentle smile. Musee helps Jeffrey decorate a cake, happily recalling that baking has always been one of her hobbies. She remembers how she used to share her freshly baked sweets with the servants as a way to socialize. Musee listens excitedly as Jeffrey talks about the cake, while she realizes that everything with Ragna has left her with little time to speak with the staff. Musee carefully presses a flower-shaped cutter into the rolled dough. Jeffrey smiles and asks what kind of person her new fiancé is. He awkwardly explains that although they live under the same roof, the servants rarely interact with their masters. Musee pauses with the cookie cutter in hand, thinking about how to answer. She recalls Ragna holding her close and describes him as a kind person who always puts her first and loves her no matter what. Jeffrey asks if that is really true, and Musee cheerfully confirms it. Musee adds that Ragna is far better than Lord Alfred, making Jeffrey gasp at the unexpected mention of her former fiancé. Jeffrey frantically reassures her that if Ragna is truly better than Lord Alfred, they will surely be happy together, urging her not to be sad. Jeffrey stares in bewilderment when he realizes Musee is not sad about it at all. Musee smiles brightly and declares that as long as she is with Ragna, she does not care what happens. Ragna calls out Musee's name from the doorway, making Jeffrey break into a cold sweat. Ragna approaches with a serious expression, prompting Musee to ask what is wrong. He wraps his arms around Musee from behind and explains that he came specifically to see her before asking who the other man is. Musee introduces Jeffrey as the household chef, while Jeffrey nervously thinks about how handsome Ragna is. Musee looks up at Ragna and asks where his glasses are. He blushes slightly and admits that he forgot them. Jeffrey smiles with relief as he realizes there was never anything to worry about. Musee happily presents the fresh cookies beside Ragna, while Jeffrey quietly prays that she will always be happy. A horse-drawn carriage travels along a steep cliffside under the dark sky as Crown Prince Reed suddenly gasps in confusion. Reed realizes he is somehow inside a carriage, even though he was just meeting the Church of the Evil Dragon at the ruins. Then, the wheel strikes the rugged road with a sharp clang. The carriage suddenly tilts and overturns at the edge of the narrow cliff, sending Reed tumbling into the open air as it plunges over the edge. Reed screams in terror as he plummets into the abyss and crashes violently onto the ground below. Reed wakes in horror, only to find himself safely back inside the moving carriage as it rattles down the road. He desperately orders the carriage to stop, but the wheel strikes the rocks again, sending him over the cliff once more. Reed lies broken on the ground, reaching a trembling hand toward the sky as he desperately wonders why this is happening. He realizes in terror that he is trapped in an endless cycle of death, with every fall bringing the same unbearable pain. Reed clutches his face and screams in despair, wondering how many hours, days, or years this torment will continue, while Ragna, Ada, and Ace watch with cheerful, sinister smiles. Second Prince Rayfan arrives with his guards and looks down at Reed, who lies collapsed among the ruins. A sweat drop forms on Rayfan's face as he realizes this must be the evil dragon's work. A royal knight reports that everyone has been secured, earning Rayfan's praise for a job well done. Rayfan turns as Ragna scratches his head and clicks his tongue in annoyance while holding the parchment. Ragna examines the parchment as Rayfan approaches and asks what is wrong. Ragna explains that he initially thought the idiot prince had taught the woman the forbidden technique, but he was mistaken. Rayfan stares at Ragna in surprise, clearly confused by his conclusion. Ragna reveals that the forbidden technique was completely absent from the prince's memories. He concludes that the woman learned it during a previous time leap and had the prince deliver it this time. Ragna suggests returning to the church and gathering Musee, the king, and even the saint, and Rayfan agrees. Carlos supports a dazed Reed as they carry him away from the ruins, leaving the prince completely stunned. Reed hangs upside down amid dark splatters, marking the end of his punishment. Inside the grand church hall, King Freddy, Carlos, Ragna, Musee, Victoria, and Leona gather as Prince Rayfan prepares to give his report. Rayfan announces that his brother Reed and 9 members of the Church of the Evil Dragon have been captured, revealing that the cult had a hideout beneath the ruins. King Freddy asks how Reed is holding up. Rayfan checks his notes and explains that Reed is in a state of panic, but his sanity remains intact. Inside a stone cell, Reed huddles beneath a blanket and trembles uncontrollably while biting his finger. Rayfan notes that his brother seems unable to actually lose his mind. King Freddy closes his eyes with a pained sigh and tells everyone that is enough. Ragna sits beside Musee with his arms crossed and announces that he will summarize everything they know so far. The group reviews what they know about Laura Conner. She switched bodies with Aliciella, adores Ragna, and despises Musee, but her reasons for learning the forbidden transfer technique, swapping bodies, and repeating the same life 5 times remain unknown. Ragna concludes from Laura's behavior and Musee's memories that the soul switch with Aliciella must have happened during the 5th life. Ragna turns to Victoria and asks what the real Aliciella, now in the church's custody, is like. Victoria explains that Aliciella is trusting, compassionate, and obedient, with a personality perfectly suited to a saint. She adds that Aliciella is no longer upset about the body switch, believing Laura must have had a good reason for doing it. Ragna responds sarcastically, remarking that she is awfully forgiving for someone who was sold to a brothel. Ragna turns to Musee and asks how she interacted with Aliciella before the body switch. He then asks what happened after Musee's engagement was cancelled. Musee recalls that Aliciella often acted overly familiar with people of higher status. Even if she meant no harm, Musee considered it improper and warned her about it. Ragna teases Musee by asking if she bullied Aliciella, but Musee denies it and insists she only gave her a verbal warning. Musee's eyes widen as another memory suddenly comes back to her. She recalls that around the time she broke off her engagement with Alfred, she was accused of viciously bullying Aliciella. Someone had even prepared fabricated evidence that Musee had never seen before. Carlos asks why Ragna is so interested in Lady Aliciella. Ragna explains that given Aliciella's true personality, she would never have simply ignored Musee's warning. He suspects Aliciella's behavior was the result of someone else's deception. Ragna points out that the woman deliberately manipulated Aliciella to lure Musee into a trap. Musee sits quietly on the sofa and casually wonders if that is really what happened. King Freddy looks at Musee in disbelief and asks if she should not be a little more surprised. Musee calmly says that she does not really care either way. With a radiant smile, she explains that as long as she is with Ragna, knowing the truth would not change anything. Musee cups Ragna's cheek and asks him to finish his revenge soon so they can go to a world meant only for the two of them. Ragna's eyes gleam with a sinister smile as he asks if she really wants him to destroy this world and make it their private paradise. Everyone freezes in shock at Ragna's terrifying interpretation of her words. Musee quickly clarifies that she did not mean anything that extreme, though she admits she would not mind as long as they stayed together. She then adds that she will probably die before him anyway. Ragna grins wickedly and assures her that she has nothing to worry about. Ragna gently touches Musee's face and declares that she is no longer human, but his bride. Since she has received his power, they will remain together even after her death. Tears of joy fill Musee's eyes as she blushes and laughs, admitting that hearing those words makes her incredibly happy. Musee hugs Ragna tightly and happily says it no longer matters whether she is alive or dead. She had been wondering how she could stay with him even after death. Musee admits she even considered becoming a ghost so she could remain by his side. Ragna playfully runs his fingers through Musee's hair and points out that a ghost could not have his child. If she has to die, he tells her to do it only after giving birth to his child. Musee blushes deeply and happily agrees without hesitation. Everyone else stares in stunned silence as the two continue gazing lovingly at each other. King Freddy clears his throat and asks what Laura Connor's ultimate goal could be after obtaining forbidden techniques, taking over a saint's body, and brainwashing the academy. He wonders if she has even begun plotting to overthrow the entire country, leaving Ragna and Musee speechless. Ragna reluctantly admits that he really did not want to bring this up. He reveals that Laura's ultimate target is most likely him. Everyone reacts with a shocked shout of disbelief. Ragna explains that the fake Aliciella openly wanted his affection and apparently tried to imprison him within the ruins. Ragna admits they still do not know why Laura keeps jumping through time or how she gained all this knowledge. Leona then raises her hand. Leona raises her hand from behind the couch while Rayfan holds his report, prompting Victoria to ask what she wants to say. With an awkward smile, Leona suggests that they look at the situation from a different angle. Leona proposes that Laura knew everything from the very beginning. She explains that Laura already knew how to capture the evil dragon and make Musee break off her engagement. Leona adds that Laura seems to know exactly how everything will unfold and acts accordingly, immediately catching Ragna's attention. Ragna's eyes narrow as a dark aura surrounds him, and he coldly asks Leona who she really is. Leona freezes in shock and breaks into a cold sweat under Ragna's intense interrogation. A sinister smirk spreads across Ragna's face as he quietly says that he finally understands. Ragna realizes he overlooked the connection and asks Leona if she is linked to the god of another world. Leona trembles as Ragna directly asks if she is a reincarnated person. Everyone watches in stunned silence. A terrifying aura erupts around Ragna as he threatens to kill Leona if she does not reveal the truth about anything involving his beloved Musee. Leona clutches the cross around her neck with tear-filled eyes and nervously admits that she was reincarnated from another world. Musee turns to Ragna in confusion and asks what a reincarnated person is. A reincarnated person is someone who dies in one world and is reborn in another while retaining the memories of their previous life. Victoria gently places a glowing hand on Leona's shoulder and reassures her that everything is fine, giving her time to explain. Leona takes a deep breath and explains that she died because of a mistake made by her world's god, who reincarnated her in this world to make amends. She reveals that her world's god was only a novice who made fatal mistakes. Its teacher, the god of this world, took responsibility by bringing the dead souls here. Leona admits that although she has never met Laura Connor, she suspects Laura may also be reincarnated. Ragna asks why she believes Laura is reincarnated. Leona explains that this world closely resembles an otome game called the Rondo of Light and Dark, the hidden saint wallows in love. Musee turns to Ragna in confusion and asks what an otome game is. The game follows Aliciella, who becomes a viscount's daughter after losing her parents, and enters school to befriend 4 male love interests, Alfred, Victor, Reed, and Jean, while overcoming various obstacles to reach a happy ending. In the game, Musee Schnorr is the Villainess and Aliciella's main rival. Leona explains that, according to the god, the time axis between the two worlds became distorted. She suspects a reincarnated person who remembered this world's events, created the game in their original world. Ragna points out that the game's creator could not travel through time and questions how they could have known all the possible scenarios. Leona suggests that the creator may have had a special ability to see the future. Ragna considers the theory, explaining that ordinary precognition only reveals one person's future, while seeing future possibilities could reveal countless possible outcomes, even unlikely ones. Leona explains that Laura believes this world is part of the game, which is why she took over Aliciella's body to become its heroine. She adds that the game has 4 main love interests. They are Crown Prince Reed, Prime Minister's son Victor, Knight Candidate Jean, and Viscount's son Alfred. Leona reveals that completing all 4 routes unlocks a special route centered on Ragna. Musee touches her chin as she remembers Laura mentioning the Ragna route before, while Ragna quietly considers the possibility. Musee nervously wonders if Laura found the other routes troublesome and only took over Aliciella's body during the 5th life because she believed Ragna's route had finally begun. Ragna summarizes the situation, explaining that Laura believes this world exists inside an otome game. Since she found the other male routes too tedious, she forced Aliciella to play through them, before taking over her body during the 5th loop to pursue Ragna herself. Carlos gives an awkward smile, wondering if someone would really steal another person's body just because they were too lazy to play the routes themselves. Leona touches her chin and explains that it makes perfect sense if Laura was simply the type of player who only cared about her favorite character's route. Leona looks satisfied, apparently the only one who understands the concept, while everyone else stares back in complete confusion. Carlos points out that Crown Prince Reed will receive nothing despite everything he did. King Freddy can only clutch his forehead in exhaustion. Ragna explains that Laura remained Aliciella's close friend until the end of the 4th loop. Aliciella trusted her completely, never realizing that Laura had been manipulating everything from behind the scenes. Musee turns toward Leona and politely calls out to the reincarnated woman. Musee asks Leona to explain the Ragna scenario from the otome game, leaving her visibly startled. With a determined gaze, Musee admits that Laura trying to approach Ragna through that scenario is deeply unpleasant to her. She insists they need to consider the scenario carefully when planning their future countermeasures. Ragna blushes deeply at Musee's words, calls her name, then lunges forward and hugs her tightly from behind, startling her into a small yelp. Ragna rests his chin on Musee's head and pulls her close, whispering that he hates that woman so much he wants to kill her. A sly smile crosses Ragna's face as he admits that he is still grateful to that woman for making Musee say such cute things out of jealousy. Musee clasps their hands together and insists that she does not want Ragna to feel anything positive toward that woman, not even gratitude. Ragna softly apologizes and agrees. Ragna cradles the back of Musee's head and pulls her close, whispering that she is the only one for him and calling her cute. Saint Victoria interrupts the couple with a small cough, then asks Leona to explain the otome game's story. Leona nervously agrees. Leona gets carried away describing the game's opening animation, from its flashy theme song and silhouettes of handsome men to the dramatic title sequence. Ragna claps his hands and cuts her off, pointing out that she has completely gone off track. Instead, he decides to project the memories directly from her mind. A bright rectangular screen appears on the wall, drawing everyone's attention as the display activates. The game's opening introduces the short-haired protagonist, Aliciella Machilas. The prologue explains that Aliciella was raised as a commoner until her parents died and an older gentleman adopted her. Through the adoption, Aliciella officially became a member of a noble household. A family portrait reveals that her parents had fled high society to elope. As a newly adopted noblewoman, Aliciella is sent to a prestigious academy for the children of nobility. Aliciella falls in a school corridor and is helped up by Crown Prince Reed, who kindly asks if she is all right. In the library, Prime Minister's son Victor notices Aliciella reading the same book he likes and smiles at the coincidence. In the courtyard, Knight candidate Jean thanks Aliciella with an embarrassed blush for tending to his injuries from training. Viscount's son Alfred approaches Aliciella with a gentle smile, explaining that newcomers often get lost in the enormous academy before offering to guide her. The scene shifts to the evening ballroom, where elegant couples dance during the academy's grand welcome celebration. Aliciella steps outside into the moonlight and encounters Ragna near the garden pavilion, staring at him in captivated surprise as their fateful meeting begins. The game reveals Ragna telling Aliciella that he came to the academy in search of his bride. Ragna wears an unusually sad and melancholic expression. Aliciella holds a hand to her chest, unable to get Ragna's face out of her mind as she wonders why his expression was so sorrowful and what these feelings mean. The projection ends, leaving everyone in tense silence across the church parlor. Ragna huffs irritably, a vein bulging on his forehead as his eyes narrow in disgust. He declares that the scene infuriated him and asks if anyone minds him venting his anger. Victoria gently urges Ragna to calm down, reminding him that it was only a fictional world inside a game. Musee recalls the game's illustration of Ragna embracing Aliciella and admits that, even knowing it was fictional, seeing them together still infuriates her. Rayfan calls his brother simple-minded for abandoning his fiancé to chase a commoner. Carlos agrees, saying such behavior is especially unacceptable for royalty, while recalling that Alfred did the same thing. King Freddy clutches his forehead and sighs that, even knowing they were only game scenarios, watching several young men pursue the same girl gives him an indescribable ache as a father. Leona stares blankly as she announces the presentation has ended, privately marveling at how conveniently the entire storyline unfolded. Victoria turns to Musee and asks if all she did was give Aliciella a simple warning. Leona explains that the game portrayed Musee as someone who dirtied Aliciella's uniform, hid her textbooks, and even tried to push her down the stairs. Musee firmly denies it, explaining that she did none of those things and only warned Aliciella on behalf of the other noble ladies. Ragna calmly says there is no point dwelling on what they cannot know. He assures them that the former fiancés and that foolish woman will eventually face punishment, while wanting to uncover more information. King Freddy moves the conversation forward and asks Ragna when he plans to make his next move. A sly, deliberate smile spreads across Ragna's face as he prepares to answer. With glowing eyes and a menacing grin, Ragna announces that they will make their move on graduation day. He explains that they will strike on the exact day Musee's engagement was ruined, publicly exposing and condemning the fake saint. King Freddy rests a hand on his forehead and confirms that graduation is about a month away. The scene shifts to the bustling town, where commoners go about their daily lives beneath the bright sky. Whispers spread through the streets that Crown Prince Reed has suddenly collapsed from an unexpected illness. Inside the royal palace, King Freddy formally welcomes second Prince Rayfan back from his studies abroad. Reed is stripped of his right to inherit the throne due to his sudden illness, making Rayfan the new crown prince. Late that night, Musee sleeps peacefully in her bed, while Lilna rests beside her on the pillow. Ragna walks down the dark corridor before gripping the doorknob and slowly opening the heavy door, his expression serious and contemplative. Edward greets Ragna with a polite smile, saying it has been a long time and that he expected they would meet again. Musee's parents sit quietly at the table behind a lit lantern. Ragna looks toward Edward, Elric, and Blas with a calm, knowing smile. Ragna crosses the room and notes that he previously met Musee's older brother Edward at the garrison. He turns toward the two people at the table and slyly asks them to introduce themselves. Elric Schnorr introduces himself and his wife, Blas, revealing that they are Musee's parents. Ragna suggests they get straight to business, nearly revealing their true identities before stopping himself. With a cold, piercing gaze, Ragna asks how much they know about the country's black ops. They freeze in tense silence. Ragna points out that people operate in the shadows to carry out the country's dirty work, then asks if they belong to that organization as an image of a bound, tortured prisoner appears. Elric asks in shock how Ragna discovered their involvement, but Ragna answers with a calm, knowing smirk. Ragna explains that he pieced it together through Musee's brother, leaving Edward staring back in surprise. Ragna crosses his arms and points out that although Edward acted like a simple-minded brute at the garrison, his swordsmanship revealed his true abilities. Ragna fixes Edward with a sharp glare and questions why he hid his abilities, reasoning that he must have been concealing something deeper. He adds that several soldiers in Edward's company moved like trained assassins, making their natural rapport with ordinary soldiers suspicious. Ragna places a hand over his chest and explains that under normal circumstances, Musee's family would never have left the two of them entirely to their own devices. He points out that her parents should have been furious when Musee broke off her engagement, yet they neither exiled nor punished her, instead placing her under house arrest. Soon after, they also showed no objection when Musee became engaged to Ragna. Elric lets out a heavy sigh and admits that hiding the truth from Ragna would be futile. Elric confirms that they are affiliated with the country's black ops, explaining that, as family, they were ordered to stay out of Musee's personal affairs. Ragna smirks knowingly and points out that despite those orders, they have quietly prepared to take revenge against the true mastermind, Laura Conner. Hearing Laura Conner's name leaves them stunned, while sweat forms on Elric's brow as they realize how much Ragna has uncovered. Elric steps forward and asks Ragna what he wants from them. Ragna places a hand over his chest and smirks, simply telling them to become his pawns. Elric and Blase repeat the word in bewilderment. Ragna spreads his arms with a manic grin and glowing eyes, telling them to rejoice because he is giving them the perfect stage for their revenge. The scene shifts back to daylight, where the large church stands beneath the clear sky. Inside the bedroom, Musee sits upright with her arms crossed, glaring sternly at Ragna as he sits quietly before her. Musee fixes Ragna with an irritated glare and firmly asks if he knows why she is angry. Ragna sighs wearily, guessing that Musee is angry because he snuck out in the middle of the night. Musee flatly rejects his guess, leaving Ragna staring back in stunned confusion. Musee leans close and explains that she does not mind him going out at night, but she wants to know exactly where he went. Ragna looks down in confusion, unable to understand what she means. Ragna scoops Musee into his arms from behind and rests his chin on her shoulder, amused as he says he thought she was jealous. With a playful smirk, he points out that sneaking out at night usually means meeting another woman, teasing that it would be natural for Musee to get angry over that. A dark aura surrounds Musee as her eyes narrow with jealousy, and she ominously asks if he went out to cheat on her. A shudder runs down Ragna's spine as cold sweat covers his face, leaving him terrified by Musee's sudden yandere reaction. Ragna nervously stammers her name and asks why she suddenly became so intimidating at the mention of cheating, while Musee remains silent beneath a dark shadow. Ragna reaches toward Musee's neck and desperately assures her that he is telling the truth and would never cheat on her. Ragna panics with tears in his eyes, insisting that he was not cheating and explaining that he only went to meet people he thought would make good pawns. A soft snicker suddenly escapes Musee. Ragna stares in bewilderment as Musee covers her mouth, struggling to contain her laughter at his panicked reaction. Musee laughs with a radiant, mischievous smile and admits that it was fun, teasing Ragna for getting so shaken up. Musee wraps her arms around Ragna's neck and asks him to imagine her sneaking out at night to meet another man. Musee looks into Ragna's eyes and explains that meeting someone of the opposite sex late at night implies a willingness to become close, leaving him to listen in tense silence. Ragna flushes with fierce possessiveness and angrily declares that he would never allow it. Musee laughs softly at his intense jealousy, clearly pleased by his possessive reaction. She points out that even Ragna has things he does not understand, then warmly says that while learning about humans is fine, she wants him to learn more about her. Lying together in bed, Musee smiles warmly and suggests spending the day talking so they can learn more about each other, while Lilna sleeps peacefully nearby. The scene shifts to the church under a bright sky as Ragna prepares his next move in a private room. Musee relaxes in an armchair nearby, while dark flames rise from a bubbling cauldron. Ragna examines the dark, glooping mixture in the cauldron and quietly recites the ingredients: slime and ghoul. Victoria enters with Leona and freezes in disbelief. She stares at Ragna and asks what in the world he is doing as Musee watches from her seat. Musee calmly explains that Ragna is making either a tool for revenge or some kind of living creature, though she admits she does not fully understand it herself. Victoria and Leona recoil in horror at the thought of creating a life form. Victoria panics and urgently pleads with Lord Ragna to stop, but he merely glances at her with an indifferent expression. She insists that creating life is an abhorrent act that must never be performed inside the church, even if it means nothing to an evil dragon. Ragna simply explains that he needs the church's blessed energy, which is why he has to do it here. With a sinister smile, he adds that this is the perfect opportunity to tell them about the revenge scenario he plans to carry out. Victoria covers her mouth in shock and asks if he really intends to do something like that. Musee calmly asks Victoria if she is okay, noticing that she looks unwell. Victoria presses a hand to her chest and nervously asks Lady Musee what she thinks about what Lord Ragna is trying to do. Musee turns toward Ragna as he tends to the cauldron, his sharp smile illuminated by the rising dark flames. A bright smile spreads across Musee's face as she happily says that Ragna looks like he is having fun. Whenever he enjoys himself, she feels happy too. Victoria gasps in horror, clutches her cross, and closes her eyes as she prays for the Lord to save this poor girl's soul. Late that night at Musee's residence, Ragna stands on the balcony beneath the dark sky and snaps his fingers, summoning Ada and Ace. A burst of smoke swirls into the forms of the demon twins, Ada and Ace, who cheerfully greet their master. Ragna crosses his arms and asks how the revenge scheme against Alfred, the Duke's son, is progressing. Ace smiles and assures him that everything is going smoothly. Ace adds with a mischievous grin that the two targets are ready whenever needed, while shadowy figures loom behind him. Ragna watches with a sharp, satisfied gaze. Ada's eyes widen as she suddenly gets an idea. Floating beside the balcony, she asks Ragna if she can have the former knight candidate, making Ace gasp in shock. Ace breaks into a nervous sweat and asks his sister if she even realizes what she is suggesting. He frantically shakes Ada and reminds her that she is asking for the very man who harmed Lady Musee and blasphemed against the evil dragon. Ada beams with delight and insists that she still wants Jean, despite knowing everything he did. Ragna's sharp eyes turn cold, and an ominous silence falls over the balcony as Ada and Ace tremble behind him. He calmly points out that Jean Bista is currently in the church's permanent service. Ragna crosses his arms and asks what Ada plans to do with Jean if she gets him. She cheerfully replies that she will turn him into a demon. Ragna studies her closely and asks if she truly has the power to turn Jean into a demon by herself. Ada flashes a peace sign and explains that she converts the vitality she collects from others into demonic energy, so she should be able to do it. Ace clutches his head with a tired groan, finally giving up on arguing with his sister. He admits he feels sorry for Ada, but there is no saving Jean now. After earning Ragna's wrath, he could be killed at any moment. Ragna calmly tells her to do whatever she wants. Ada leans over the railing in delighted surprise and asks if he really means it, while Ace stares in shock at his master's answer. With a smile, Ragna points out that for someone who blindly follows a code of chivalry, being consumed by darkness will be excruciating. He adds that if Ada gives Jean her power, he will transform into an incubus. A sinister grin spreads across Ragna's face as he remarks that someone as naive as Jean will find the experience especially painful. Ada and Ace exchange amused looks, realizing that this is the face of someone thoroughly enjoying his revenge. Under the bright daytime sky, Ada pops a party popper and cheerfully congratulates Jean on becoming a demon. Jean brushes the streamers from his hair and asks what she means, assuming she is just joking around. Ada winks and points at him, explaining that Ragna gave her full permission. She excitedly announces that Jean is going to become a demon. Jean's eyes widen in utter shock as the news sinks in. Ada tilts her head and wonders why he is so surprised, leaving him struggling to respond. Cold sweat runs down Jean's face as he says he cannot believe someone can become a demon so easily. Ada rests a finger against her cheek and explains that it is not actually easy. She will have to use all the vitality she has accumulated, but converting it into demonic energy will make the transformation possible. She casually adds that Ragna also transformed his bride into a non-human, leaving Jean completely stunned. Ada explains that the bride is Ragna's one and only, but as a human, she would have a short lifespan and die before him. That is why he transformed her into the bride of the evil dragon. Jean asks if that means Lady Musee has become a demon, but Ada explains that her case is a little different. Ada notes that Musee's disposition is remarkably similar to Ragna's, but she prefers to think of being the evil dragon's bride as a bond that ties them together. With a cheerful smile, Ada points out that Jean will simply become an ordinary demon. Jean stares in stunned silence as she explains that he will become a normal demon because she is giving him her own power. Jean clenches a fist against his chest, bitterly realizing how naive he had been. He recalls the horrific visions that have tormented him, along with the constant fear of death Lord Ragna has inflicted on him every night. Jean had foolishly believed that enduring the punishment would eventually earn him forgiveness. His eyes fall as he realizes that hope was nothing more than a pipe dream. Now, he is facing the reality of becoming an inhuman monster. Jean looks up with troubled eyes and quietly wonders why this is happening to him. A sly smile spreads across Ada's face as she prepares her answer. Ada leans close to Jean, lifts his chin with a finger, and whispers that she is doing this simply because she wants him to be hers. She cups Jean's blushing cheek and explains with a seductive smile that, as a demon, she enjoys corrupting and controlling upright boys like him. Ada leans toward his trembling lips and whispers that for someone who values chivalry so deeply, the experience will be especially torturous. As time passes, Jean is slowly transformed into a demon and trapped in an endless dream to serve as Ada's source of vitality. Bound tightly in Ada's embrace, Jean suffers as his noble knightly ideals clash with his body's instinctive desires. Reduced to tears and complete despair, Jean gradually becomes a wild, lust-driven beast under Ada's control. Later that night, the scene shifts to Aliciella's residence beneath the starry sky. Inside her room, the fake Aliciella stares in stunned disbelief after learning that Lord Reed was disinherited due to a sudden illness. The fake Aliciella clutches her dress in panic and angrily demands to know what happened as the maid stands silently nearby. She focuses on the most critical element of the otome game, the closeness level. Reed's image appears in her thoughts as she recalls that two conditions must be met to advance along a chosen route. First, the desired love interest must have the highest closeness level among all the candidates. Second, the closeness level of at least one other love interest must also continue rising. Laura recalls that meeting both conditions triggers events tied to each love interest's abilities, which then become key parts of the chosen route. She had deliberately kept Reed's closeness level high enough to enter Ragna's route this time, and she hated every second of it. That was why she never cared what happened to Victor or Jean, as memories of their defeats flashed through her mind. Laura grits her teeth in frustration, unable to believe that Reed's succession to the throne has been completely revoked. Laura reaches for her teacup with trembling hands, despairing over what happened. This sudden twist never existed in the game's scenarios. She erupts into uncontrollable rage, screaming in frustration as she hurls the teacup across the room and startles her maid. The maid nervously calls out Lady Aliciella's name as shattered porcelain scatters across the floor, but Laura angrily orders her to shut up. Clutching her head, Laura screams at the top of her lungs and orders the maid to leave her alone. The door slams shut behind the maid as Laura bites her finger and glares with venomous hatred, blaming Musee for everything. Her hatred for the Villainess burns even stronger. In a flashback to her previous life, Laura sits alone in her room playing the otome game, surrounded by Ragna merchandise. Back then, he was her entire world. She fondly remembers Ragna's dialogue from the game, where he smiles warmly and assures her not to worry because he is right there. Tears well in her eyes as she blushes deeply, completely captivated by the screen and convinced that what she felt was real love. Laura imagines embracing Ragna, convinced that entering the game was fate and determined not to let this chance slip away. She vows with absolute conviction that no one will stand in her way. Tears stream down Laura's flushed face as she clutches her chest and calls out Ragna's name, professing her love while desperately asking why he refuses to choose her, the heroine. A sudden knock interrupts her grief. Laura opens the door and complains that she wanted to be left alone, only to freeze in shock. Ragna stands at the doorway in formal attire, looking down at her with a gentle smile as he warmly says he came to see her. Tears of joy fill Laura's eyes as she throws her arms around Ragna, ecstatic that she was right all along and he truly chose her. Outside, beneath the window, a man in a formal suit sits among the tree branches, silently watching the scene from the shadows. Late at night, Duke Renblu's residence sits quietly beneath the starry sky. Inside, Alfred sits in a large armchair, groaning as he clutches his aching head. Musee's former fiancé suffers from a throbbing headache, unable to understand what is happening. He recalls the strange events of late. His friend Victor was jailed for human trafficking, his guard Jean vanished after leaving the academy, and Prince Reed was sent away for an illness. Strangely, he never questioned any of it until now. The realization leaves Alfred shaken as he wonders why he never noticed how bizarre everything was. He remembers holding Aliciella's hand and wonders why he was ever attracted to her. Then he recalls turning away from Musee and questions why he ever betrayed her. Every time he tries to find the answers, a splitting headache overwhelms him and blocks his thoughts. A sly voice suddenly speaks up, amused that his brainwashing is finally starting to wear off. Alfred freezes in shock as Ragna appears before him in a swirl of dark mist, holding Musee in his arms. Musee remains calm as Ragna holds her close. Alfred stares at them with trembling eyes and mutters Musee's name, wondering how long they have been there. Ragna glares at him and coldly warns him never to call his Musee by name, sending a shiver of fear through Alfred. Alfred freezes beside the armchair as Ragna steps forward with Musee, warning him not to run because he has business to settle. Ragna leans closer with a sly smile and grips Alfred by the throat. Ragna looks down at him with sharp eyes and a sinister smirk, saying it would be a shame to carry out his plan without first explaining the reason. With a dark, unsettling stare, Ragna calmly promises to take his time and tell him everything. Alfred leans back in his chair, sweating as he struggles to process the revelation, wondering if brainwashing and time loops are really possible. Ragna sits beside Musee on the couch and calmly tells the trembling Alfred the truth. They killed Musee. Musee winks sweetly as Ragna wraps an arm around her, declaring with a sinister smirk that he is here to get revenge on all of them. Ragna snaps his fingers and calls someone out as dark energy fills the room, sending Alfred into a panic. A massive, shadowy figure emerges from the doorway, spreading dark mist across the floor as Alfred gasps in terror. The creature is Parasite, who stands beside the phantasmal dragon Machina in his formal suit. Parasite drips with dark slime as he asks if Ragna called him, prompting Ragna to reveal that he has prepared a human vessel for him. Parasite turns toward Alfred and asks if he is the young man Ragna meant, making Alfred flinch in terror. Ragna recalls how Alfred stabbed Musee to death right before his eyes, bitterly noting that he clung to that woman again in this fifth life. Alfred recoils in shock, clutching his chest as he struggles to catch his breath. Alfred rises before them in desperation, clutching his chest as he begs Ragna and Musee for help. In a panic, Alfred pleads that even if time is repeating, he cannot remember anything. He insists he was brainwashed, and begs Ragna to consider those circumstances. Ragna gives him a chilling glare and coldly asks why the evil dragon of ruin should care about a human's way of thinking. Alfred freezes in horror as his face turns pale and cold sweat runs down his cheek. He turns to Musee and desperately calls her name, begging her to say something as Ragna, Machina, and Parasite stand behind her. Alfred insists that the man from the fourth loop and his current self are completely different, repeatedly claiming that he was only brainwashed. Musee tilts her head and casually remarks that Ragna seems to be enjoying himself, wondering why she should stop him. Alfred stares at her in disbelief, reminding her that he was once her fiancé. Musee touches a finger to her cheek and calmly explains that Ragna is the only person who matters to her. Musee cups Ragna's blushing cheek with a radiant smile and tells Alfred she does not care if he dies, so he should at least die by making Ragna happy. Dark magic cuffs snap around Alfred's wrists and ankles, pinning him face down as he screams in panic. Alfred weeps in terror at Ragna's feet, desperately screaming that he does not want to die. Ragna gives him a sinister smile and calmly assures him that he is not going to die. Parasite slides toward Alfred as Ragna explains that it will burrow into his body and reconstruct it from within. Dark magic forces Alfred's mouth open as Parasite looms over him. Ragna explains that he will lose consciousness while the creature takes over his flesh. Tears stream down Alfred's face as Parasite forces its way into his mouth. Ragna calmly explains that Alfred will simply stop being the one controlling his own body. Alfred lets out a muffled scream as Parasite invades his body, accompanied by the sickening sounds of cracking bones and tearing flesh. As Alfred continues to struggle, Ragna turns toward Machina while Musee sits calmly beside him. Alfred lies face down, barely conscious as Parasite takes over his body. Ragna orders Machina to use his illusions to make Alfred look like Ragna once his consciousness disappears completely. Machina listens as Ragna explains that the disguised Alfred will pretend to be him and visit that woman. Alfred Renbleu stands defeated beneath the theatrical curtains, his body covered in dark splatters and Parasite's shadow, marking the completion of Ragna's revenge. Ragna explains with a sinister smile that Parasite will use his appearance to visit Laura, as the illusion shows the disguised figure arriving at her door. Ragna coldly remarks that the foolish woman will welcome him without realizing anything is wrong. Laura embraces the disguised figure in bed, completely believing that he is Ragna. Laura lies beneath the sheets with a blissful smile, gently resting her hand on him. Tears of happiness fill Laura's eyes as she tenderly touches him, feeling as though she is living a dream. Laura embraces the dark-haired figure tightly, rejoicing that Ragna chose her and believing they finally became close the previous night. Laura clutches the bedsheet with a triumphant blush and proudly declares that she has defeated the villainous Musee, only to freeze when she turns around. A scream of despair echoes through the hall as Butler, Nigel, and the maids rush into the bedroom, demanding to know what happened to their lady. Laura clutches the blanket to her chest in horror as Nigel finds Lord Alfred shirtless in her bed, clutching his aching head, and demands an explanation. Alfred covers himself with the blanket and stammers that he has no idea what happened, insisting that he only came to visit Aliciella. Alfred clutches his head and insists that Aliciella told him to hold her, claiming he had completely lost his mind and would never have agreed if he had been thinking clearly. Laura stares blankly ahead and admits to herself that she did use her saintly powers to seduce him. She looks down in disbelief, wondering why Alfred is here when she thought she was with Ragna, while he insists that it was him all along. Laura breaks down in tears and desperately insists that it was Ragna who was with her last night. Nigel scowls angrily and demands to know what all the shouting is about as the maids watch in distress. Aliciella's grandfather, Nigel Machilas, stands in the doorway, staring in stunned confusion at the scene. Nigel gestures toward the flustered servants and sternly demands an explanation. A maid raises her hand and hesitantly says that what she has to report is difficult to explain. The maid, secretly the succubus Ada in disguise, calmly claims that she saw Lady Aliciella invite Lord Alfred into her room last night. Nigel turns on her in disbelief and demands to know why she did not stop them. With fake tears, the maid claims Laura had recently been striking the staff, saying she was too afraid to intervene. Laura stares back in disbelief as Nigel watches from the doorway. Nigel realizes he will never get the full story like this, so he decides to summon Duke Renbleu and discuss the matter with him directly. Duke Amphi Renbleu soon arrives and angrily strikes his son while harshly reprimanding him. Laura clutches her chest in distress as Alfred desperately tries to explain himself, especially since Aliciella was believed to be a hidden saint. The situation is settled with the conclusion that Alfred could not resist Laura's seduction, resulting in her loss of chastity. The final decision is made. Alfred and Aliciella will be married. The arrangement benefits both sides, giving Alfred and his dukedom the saint's divine favor while elevating Aliciella from viscountess to duchess. The marriage is deemed a perfect match for both noble families. Laura clutches her chest and vehemently refuses, declaring that she will not marry Alfred because she intends to marry Ragna. Nigel sternly tells his granddaughter to accept reality, making it clear that she has no choice but to marry Alfred. Laura stares in stunned silence as Nigel bluntly tells her that Ragna would never want a promiscuous woman like her. She bites her trembling lip and breaks down, unable to understand why this is happening to her. Fury and despair consume Laura as she screams, desperately demanding to know why everything went wrong. Students whisper in the academy hallways about the latest scandal involving Lord Alfred and Lady Aliciella. As Laura walks down the corridor alone, the students gossip that the wedding is set for 6 months from now and was rushed because she forced herself on Alfred. Laura grits her teeth as tears well up, forced to endure the students' harsh gossip about her and the Duke's family. Back in their room, Ragna embraces Musee from behind on the bed and notes, with a sinister smile, that Ace's rumors have worked perfectly. Laura walks through the halls as students whisper and avoid her. Ragna explains that most of them have regained their senses, while she can no longer brainwash anyone or rely on her former allies. Musee leans into Ragna's embrace and remarks that the woman is in quite a predicament. Ragna agrees, noting that she has been completely cornered mentally. Ragna narrows his eye and declares that the next step is to take his revenge on her physically. Ragna remarks that he cannot believe she is finally finished as well, leaving Musee bewildered. Musee turns toward him with wide, slitted eyes as Ragna softly calls her name and reveals that she has now fully become the evil dragon's bride. Musee's glowing eyes widen as Ragna assures her that she would survive if she went to his world now, adding that they could finally be together closely. A sly, delighted smile spreads across Ragna's face as he leans closer to her. Ragna gently plays with a strand of Musee's hair and suggests that they visit his garden once his revenge is complete. Ragna fixes her with a predatory gaze and warns that even if she refuses, he will simply take her with him. Musee blushes brightly and laughs, asking if he really thinks she would ever refuse him. The scene shifts to the academy ballroom, where elegant chandeliers illuminate the long-awaited graduation party. Laura steps onto the dance floor in a layered dress, nervously biting her finger as she stands beside Alfred under the students' cold stares. Laura grits her teeth and angrily wonders why she has to marry Alfred. She turns toward the murmuring crowd with trembling eyes, despairing that none of this should be happening. Musee arrives at the party in an elegant black gown, walking arm in arm with Ragna, who wears formal clothes and glasses. The guests marvel at Musee's beauty and praise the handsome man beside her, leaving Laura frozen in shock. Laura points at Musee in disbelief and demands to know why she is with Ragna as Alfred sweats behind her. Musee smiles brightly and proudly declares that of course she would be by Ragna's side because she is his fiancé and bride. The ballroom doors burst open as a squad of royal guards marches inside. Laura screams as the guards seize her and slam her face down onto the floor, leaving her to wonder what is happening now. The commander holds up a scroll and announces before the stunned crowd that Aliciella Machillas is under arrest for treason. Laura stares up in disbelief as the curtain finally rises on her judgment. As the ballroom erupts in chaos, royal guards pin Laura to the floor while their commander declares Aliciella Machillas under arrest for treason. Pinned helplessly to the floor, Laura stares in panic, unable to understand why she is being charged with treason. King Freddy descends the staircase with his attendants and demands to know what happened. With a stern gaze, King Freddy orders the guard commander to give his full report. The commander reports that she brainwashed former Crown Prince Reed, Victor, Jean, and Alfred, while also manipulating numerous students into mentally tormenting Lady Musee Schnorr. He then reveals that she was also involved in human trafficking with Victor. The commander adds that she learned a forbidden soul exchange technique from the brainwashed former Crown Prince and used it to steal another person's body. He points to the woman on the floor and reveals that her true identity is Laura Conner, who stole Lady Aliciella Machillas' body. He further accuses her of giving the Church of the Evil Dragon a forbidden technique to control the evil dragon, making her actions a clear act of treason. Sweating in panic, Laura desperately denies committing treason, insisting that the game never had any scenario like this. Pinned face down by the guards, Laura turns her head and glares directly at Musee. Laura furiously accuses Musee of orchestrating everything, demanding to know why she always gets in the heroine's way. The uneasy guests watch as Laura desperately screams that she should be the one standing beside Ragna. Musee looks down with sharp, glowing eyes and calmly tells Lady Laura that she is doing nothing. The guard commander tells King Freddy that Laura appears psychotic, convinced that this world is merely a game, while she listens in horror. He explains that she committed these crimes and treason solely to win the favor of Musee's fiancé, Lord Ragna Dragnica. According to the commander, Laura's unrequited love for Ragna made her unable to forgive Musee for standing by his side. King Freddy closes his eyes and silently contemplates the full extent of her crimes. King Freddy extends his arm and orders the guards to arrest Laura Conner as a first-class criminal. The guards drag Laura away as she screams in protest, while the king orders them to use any means necessary to uncover her hidden information. Ragna watches with a knowing smirk. Ragna stands proudly beside Musee and smiles with glowing, slit-like eyes, declaring that the real fun can finally begin. After several days alone in a dark cell, Laura's spirit begins to weaken. Bound to a wooden chair in the pitch-black cell, Laura stares blankly ahead and wonders how long she has been trapped there. Mirka's heels echo across the stone floor as she approaches and remarks that Laura is finally awake. She then raises a gleaming blade and slashes at her, leaving Laura confused. Blood pours from the deep wound on Laura's cuffed wrist as she writhes in pain. Laura screams in agony, but a gentle glow soon surrounds her hand and instantly seals the wound. Musee's older sister, Mirka, calmly smiles as she examines her blade and remarks that Laura healed instantly, proving she truly is a hidden saint. Tears of pain fill Laura's eyes as she grits her teeth and bitterly curses Mirka. Mirka swings her blade with a chilling smirk, warning Laura not to speak to her so disrespectfully. A swift slash cuts across Laura's neck, spraying blood as her eyes widen in horror. Laura screams through her tears as the wound glows and heals, while Mirka marvels that the injury repairs itself even though the pain remains. Mirka smiles over her bloodied blade, remarking that such rapid healing makes it easy to go too far. Edward watches with an awkward sweat and comments on his sister's enthusiasm. She produces a long garrote wire with a sharp grin, proving why she is known as the pride of the Black Ops. Laura recoils in terror as the cold blade nears her face. Mirka leans close with her blade poised against Laura's face and asks if she is ready to talk, urging her to reveal everything she knows. The Schnorr family's Black Ops unit tortures Laura for several days. Laura finally breaks down as they snap each of her fingers one by one. Bound tightly with ropes, Laura is submerged underwater until she nearly drowns. The torturers subject her to every form of violence, but while her saintly powers heal each injury, the unbearable pain remains. Weeping and barely able to speak, Laura desperately begs Ragna to save her, finally realizing that this cruel world could never have been just a game. As the darkness closes in, Laura can no longer deny the terrifying truth that this world is real. A faint rustle comes from the shadows as Laura notices someone approaching her cell. Tears of relief fill Laura's eyes as she wonders if Ragna has finally come to save her. Her hopeful smile vanishes the moment she sees who has arrived. Alfred stands by the wooden door in a formal suit with a gentle smile, leaving Laura stunned and wondering why he is there. The figure leans toward the captive and apologetically explains that although he is wearing Alfred's body, he is not actually Alfred. The entity cheerfully introduces himself as Parasite and reveals that he has completely consumed Alfred's soul. Laura stares in stunned disbelief, struggling to process the horrifying truth about Alfred. Parasite explains that the evil dragon has taken revenge on everyone responsible for killing his bride and punished each of them accordingly. With a cheerful clap, Parasite tells Laura that she will suffer the same fate as Victor at the hands of demons. Glowing eyes appear throughout the darkness as Parasite assures Laura that she will not be used to create more demons, leaving her confused. Demons emerge from a cloud of smoke with excited smiles, announcing that it is their turn. Shadowy hands close in around Laura as a voice declares that this is retribution for trampling the dignity of the bride and the true hidden saint. Laura screams in terror as horrifying sounds echo throughout the room. At the church, royal guards carry a blood-stained stretcher through the corridor as a heavily pregnant Laura watches with a blank, hollow stare. Blood pours from the stretcher, but the woman cannot bleed to death because her saintly healing ability keeps restoring her body. Ragna holds Musee close and suggests they visit the woman once the thing inside her is nearly ready to be born, asking if Musee has anything to say to her. Musee touches her chin and honestly admits that she does not care. In the darkness, Musee admits that she cannot stand the thought of Ragna directing any bloodlust, hatred, anger, or sympathy towards someone else. Musee gives Ragna a possessive look and warns him not to make her worry. Musee gently grips Ragna's neck and warns him about what might happen if he ignores her. With a warm blush and bright smile, Musee admits that she might love Ragna so much one day that she ends up killing him. A thrilling shudder runs through Ragna as he leans into her embrace and quietly admits that he loves her enough to kill her too. Laura slowly opens her eyes and blinks as consciousness returns. Laura sits alone on the floor of a large, brightly lit room and gasps in confusion, wondering where she is. Laura recalls being separated from Alfred and defiled by demons, then realizes in horror that not even a full night has passed, yet her belly is already heavily swollen. A sharp breath escapes Laura as the terrifying reality finally sinks in. Laura clutches her head as tears stream down her face, screaming in unbearable agony. Despair consumes Laura as she repeatedly cries out, unable to understand why this is happening to her. Her desperate screams echo through the darkness as she repeatedly calls out Ragna's name. Tears stream down Laura's face as she clutches her cheek and desperately screams for someone to save her. Her screams suddenly stop when a wet splattering sound comes from beside her. Laura groans in confusion before realizing in horror that something has just been born from her belly. A grotesque, slime-covered creature gurgles as it crawls across the floor beside Laura's feet. Laura shrieks in horror and kicks the disgusting creature away in frantic denial. The creature collapses and lets out a faint hiss before dissolving into ash. Laura clutches her head and screams in confusion, while Ragna and Musee emerge from a dark mist and calmly remark on how quickly it died. Tears fill Laura's eyes as she looks up and breathlessly calls Ragna's name. Ragna gives her a sinister smirk and asks what she thought of her child, then reveals how it felt to kill the creature he gave her. Ragna points to the smoldering remains and coldly notes that Laura let it die without helping, revealing that he created the creature himself. Laura stares in stunned silence as Ragna tells her that she killed the child he gave her. Laura desperately scoops the melting remains into her hands and cries that it was her and Ragna's baby. Ragna clutches his head and laughs uncontrollably, excitedly telling Musee that Laura has completely lost her mind. Laura cradles the dripping sludge while weeping in despair as Ragna notes that her saintly powers prevent her from truly going insane, yet she is still completely broken down. Ragna gives a sharp smirk and clarifies that, although he admitted to creating the creature, he never called it his child, it was merely a chimera. Ragna walks over to Laura and coldly declares that Musee is the only person he loves. A sinister smile spreads across Ragna's face as he adds that even if Laura died, he would feel neither sadness nor grief. Ragna fixes Laura with a cold glare and tells her there is no way he could ever love a disgraceful woman like her. Laura's body sways weakly before she collapses face down onto the floor and lies completely still. Ragna gently holds Musee and says that it is finally over. Musee looks back in confusion and wonders if Laura died from the shock of his words. Ragna explains that his words were merely the final blow, since the demons had already pushed Laura's saintly power beyond its breaking point. Ragna gently clasps Musee's hand and declares that his long-awaited revenge is finally complete. Ragna gazes lovingly into Musee's eyes and asks his beloved bride to live with him in his world for all eternity. Musee blushes and laughs joyfully, playfully asking if he really needs to ask. Musee closes her eyes and leans into Ragna's embrace, softly declaring that she belongs by his side. Soon after, the evil dragon of ruin and his bride disappear from the world. They leave the humans behind, as King Freddy manages the kingdom. Leona and Carlos share a quiet drink. Rayfan kneels before Saint Victoria. Edward trains Yuri with wooden swords. Mirka attends to the nobility, and Elric embraces Blase by the window. Later, guards lead Laura Conner onto the execution platform before a massive crowd, where she faces the guillotine as a woman without equal in evil. Locked into the wooden stocks beneath the guillotine, Laura stares ahead with hollow eyes as the blade falls and ends her life. Far away in Ragna's garden, Ragna and Musee stand hand in hand before the grand cathedral window in their wedding attire, finally united for good. Ragna smiles softly with sharp eyes and remarks that weddings usually involve making a vow to God, but he has no intention of doing that. Musee laughs beneath her veil and happily admits that she feels the same way. Ragna gazes lovingly at his bride and vows that they will spend eternity together, promising never to let her go even after they both rot away. Musee gazes back with glowing eyes and vows to remain Ragna's alone for all eternity, declaring that he will be hers in life and death. Outside the cathedral, their demon attendants peek through the doors as Ada and Ace watch happily, with Ace wiping away tears of joy. Ragna and Musee share a tender moment as their story comes to an end.